Hey guys, tonight we embark on a journey not through space, but deep into time, to a place of silent, imposing stone and whispered secrets, the ancient citadel of Great Zimbabwe. Imagine the air, thick with the scent of dusk on the African savanna, the ground beneath your feet holding centuries of untold stories. You're standing before monumental walls, pieced together with a skill that baffles and amazes, all under a sky slowly surrendering to a canopy of stars. It's a place that feels profoundly disconnected from our world of instant notifications and doorstep deliveries. In fact, if you were actually dropped here in its heyday without your smartphone and a really good water filter, you probably won't survive this. The sheer ingenuity on display, born from a totally different understanding of the world, is humbling. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It really does help the channel find other curious minds like yours. And, as always, I'd love to see where you're tuning in from and what time it is in your corner of the world. Pop a comment down below. It's always a quiet thrill to see our little community stretching across the globe. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The last rays of the sun bleed across the horizon, painting the underside of the scattered acacia clouds in hues of fiery orange and soft lavender. You've been traveling for what feels like an eternity. The gentle sway and rumble, a constant companion. But now a different kind of stillness begins to settle. The air, which earlier in the day was a shimmering, almost tangible heat, now cools rapidly, carrying the earthy scent of dust, dry grass, and something else, something ancient and undisturbed, like the air from a long-sealed tomb. Only this tomb is the size of a city. You find yourself standing on a slight rise, the vast, undulating landscape of the Zimbabwean plateau stretching out before you. The light is tricky now, playing games with distance and form. Is that a peculiar rock formation over there, or something? More your guide. A quiet man whose ancestors have known this land for generations, simply nods towards it. A silent invitation to look closer, to feel closer. There's no rush. Here, time moves differently. It's so quiet. The kind of profound silence that makes your ears ring slightly, trying to fill the void. You can almost hear your phone battery draining in your pocket, desperately searching for a signal that probably packed up and left this area a few centuries ago, if it ever even bothered to visit. As you begin to walk, the ground beneath your feet is uneven, a mixture of worn rock and resilient tufts of grass that have somehow found purchase in the thin soil. Every step feels deliberate, measured. The sounds of the approaching night begin to weave their subtle symphony, the insistent chirp of crickets tuning up their tiny orchestras, the distant, mournful call of a nightjar. Perhaps the rustle in the undergrowth that could be anything from a harmless genet to something that views you as an unexpected late-night snack. You try to swat an imaginary mosquito, then pause, wondering if it's some incredibly rare, protected species here. Or maybe, just maybe, the highly judgmental reincarnation of one of the original city planners, silently critiquing your choice of footwear for this sacred pilgrimage. Probably just a regular mosquito, though. Still, best not to anger the local spirits, or the local insects. And then you see them, more clearly this time, as your eyes adjust to the deepening twilight. Not just rocks, but definite shapes, dark and hulking against the fading light. Silhouettes, imposing, yes, but also strangely organic, as if they grew out of the very granite hills that cup this hidden valley. These are the first outlying sentinels of Great Zimbabwe. There are no grand boulevards leading you in, no neon signs saying, "Ancient wonder this way." The approach is subtle, almost reluctant, as if the city itself is unsure whether it wants to be found again, after so many centuries of quiet repose. You follow a barely discernible path, worn smooth by time and, long ago, by countless feet. Imagine those feet traders carrying goods from the distant coasts, glass beads from India, perhaps, or porcelain from China, evidence of which has been found scattered across this very ground, a testament to the reach of this once thriving hub. Great Zimbabwe, in its prime, particularly between the 11th and 15th centuries, wasn't some isolated primitive village. It was the heart of a vast Shona trading empire, a bustling metropolis of its time, its influence stretching for hundreds, if not thousands, of miles. This very spot, now so profoundly quiet, would have echoed with voices, the clatter of tools, the sounds of a vibrant community. It's a strange thought, trying to overlay that bustling past onto the serene, almost melancholic, present. The path begins to climb gently. The air grows cooler still. You pull your imaginary traveler's cloak a little tighter around you, or maybe it's just your duvet. Same difference in this sleepy state. Ahead, the shapes resolve into definite structures. Walls. Not just any walls. These are massive, curving expanses of stone, seemingly piled one atop the other with an impossible precision. There's no glint of mortar, no obvious binding agent holding them together. They just are, solid, enduring. You reach out a hand, half expecting the image to shimmer and fade like a mirage. But the stone is cool and undeniably real beneath your fingertips. Rough, yet expertly fitted. The scale is what hits you first. It's one thing to see pictures, to read descriptions. It's another entirely to stand at the foot of something so monumental, built by human hands without the aid of modern machinery. How did they lift these massive granite blocks? How did they shape them with such care? These are questions that will follow you as you explore deeper. Questions that still echo in the halls of academia. It's like looking at a pyramid or Stonehenge. That same sense of awe mixed with a healthy dose of how on earth. They didn't have user manuals or YouTube tutorials for building your own mortarless megalithic structure in 10 easy steps. Or, if they did, they were probably carved on a very large, very heavy tablet, not ideal for carrying around the construction site. Darkness is now falling in earnest. The first stars are piercing the deep indigo velvet of the sky, bright and diamond hard, untouched by the light pollution that veils them in our modern cities. Here, they blaze with a fierce, ancient light, the same stars that shone down on the builders of this enigmatic place. There's a profound sense of connection in that thought. A bridge across the centuries made of starlight and stone. You are now standing in what feels like an outer courtyard. The great walls looming like sleeping giants around you. The silence is broken only by the whisper of a breeze as it sighs through the gaps in the stonework, carrying faint, indefinable scents, and, you fancy, the faintest murmur of forgotten conversations. It's easy to let your imagination wander here. Who walked these paths? What were their hopes, their fears, their daily concerns? Were they worried about the harvest, the arrival of a trading caravan, or perhaps just whether their neighbor would finally return that borrowed grinding stone? Mundane concerns, no doubt, lived out within these extraordinary surroundings. One of the truly fascinating, and for a long time, rather contentious aspects of Great Zimbabwe is the sheer audacity of its existence in the eyes of early European explorers. When explorers like Karl Mauck stumbled upon these ruins in the late 19th century, the prevailing colonial mindset simply couldn't fathom that indigenous Africans could have conceived and constructed something so sophisticated and monumental. It was so grand, so unlike anything they expected to find, that they immediately started looking for external influences. Phoenicians were a popular candidate for a while. Others mused about links to King Solomon's mines and the Queen of Sheba. It was the ultimate historical gaslighting, really, attributing the genius of an entire civilization to anyone but the people whose ancestors had lived on that land for millennia. It's a quirky and rather telling tidbit, that initial denial, highlighting how often prejudice can blind people to the obvious. Thankfully, modern archaeology has long since confirmed the indigenous origins of Great Zimbabwe, built by the ancestors of the modern Shona people. No lost Roman legions or wandering biblical figures required. Thank you very much. Just incredible local ingenuity, skill, and a whole lot of granite. You move towards a narrower opening, a passage between two towering walls. It feels like entering a different realm. The temperature drops a few more degrees. The sounds of the outside world recede further, replaced by the echo of your own soft footsteps on the stone-flagged ground. The darkness here is deeper, more complete. You pause, allowing your senses to adjust, to pick up the subtle textures of the air, the way the silence presses in, a comforting blanket rather than a void. Archaeologists and historians still argue whether the initial settlements on the nearby hill complex, which predates much of the grander structures you're about to explore, were primarily for defensive or religious purposes, or perhaps a combination of both. Was it a king's heavily fortified palace, a sacred site for rituals and ceremonies, or the bustling administrative heart of a powerful state? The truth is likely a complex tapestry woven from all these threads. What isn't debated is its significance. This was a political and religious center, a hub of power and culture that dominated the region for centuries. The walls themselves, as you'll come to appreciate, weren't just functional. They were statements of power, of prestige, of a sophisticated understanding of engineering and aesthetics. The moon is beginning to rise now, a pale silver disk climbing above the dark silhouette of the walls, casting long, eerie shadows that dance and writhe as if the spirits of the place are stirring. It's a good time to find a place to rest, to let the atmosphere of this ancient city truly sink in. Not that you'll be setting up a tent and unrolling a sleeping bag. Mind you, that's generally frowned upon by heritage site custodians, and besides, the local hyena population might have opinions on your choice of camping spot. No, this is an imaginative settling, a pause in our narrative journey. You find a smooth, broad stone, still holding a faint warmth from the departed sun, and settle down, leaning back against a section of wall that has stood for perhaps 700 or 800 years. Think about that. 8 centuries. Generations have been born, lived, and died. Empires have risen and fallen elsewhere in the world, and still these stones remain, a silent testament to the people who placed them here. You look up at the sky, now a breathtaking panorama of stars. There's no glow from distant cities here to dim their brilliance. It's a view that has remained unchanged, the same celestial canopy that would have greeted the inhabitants of Great Zimbabwe each night. There's a sense of peace that descends, a tranquility that seeps into your bones. The initial awe is still there, but it's now mingled with a growing curiosity, a desire to understand more about the hands that shaped this incredible place, the minds that conceived of its intricate design, and the society that thrived within its protective embrace. The sheer effort involved in quarrying the granite, shaping it, and then fitting it so perfectly without mortar is mind-boggling. Imagine the organization required, the sheer manpower. It wasn't a weekend DIY project. This was a generational undertaking, a monumental expression of a culture's identity and capability. And they did it all without the benefit of caffeinated energy drinks or motivational posters in the break room. Truly remarkable. The breeze picks up again, a little stronger this time, rustling through unseen leaves and carrying with it the faint, dry scent of distant wood smoke, perhaps from a modern village miles away, or maybe, just maybe, a phantom aroma from the hearth fires of the past. You close your eyes for a moment, just listening to the silence, to the night, to the stones themselves. It's a good place to begin our exploration, here at the edge of darkness, on the cusp of discovery. The mysteries of Great Zimbabwe are laid out before you, veiled by the night, but inviting you to uncover them, one carefully placed stone at a time. The journey into its heart, into the surprisingly complex architecture of its walls, has truly begun. And don't worry, we'll bring virtual flashlights for the darker bits. So, with those virtual flashlights at the ready, or perhaps more fittingly, as the first tentative rays of dawn begin to stretch across the savannah, chasing away the deepest shadows, you find yourself standing ready to truly see what this ancient city holds. The night offered mystery and a sense of profound antiquity, but the clear light of a new day, well, that's when the sheer, unadulterated audacity of Great Zimbabwe's walls really hits you. It's like going from a whispered rumor to a headline story, printed in 72-point bold font. You step out from that sheltered spot where you rested, the imaginary cloak or actual duvet, now less necessary as a hint of warmth begins to infuse the air. And there they are, the walls. They don't just rise, they erupt from the earth. Great sweeping arcs of stone that seem to ripple across the landscape. Forget your garden wall. Forget any wall you've likely encountered in your day-to-day life. These are walls on an entirely different existential plane. Some sections soar upwards to heights of over 36 feet. That's around 11 meters. High enough to make you crane your neck and feel incredibly small. And they're not just tall, they are astoundingly thick. In places, the base of these colossal structures can be up to 17 feet, or about 5 to 6 meters, wide. You could comfortably drive a small car along the top of some of them, if you were so inclined, and, if it wasn't a priceless archaeological treasure, these walls are so robust, they make your average medieval European castle look like it's been on a rather strict celery and water diet. Your eyes try to take it all in, but it's almost too much. The scale is one thing, but then there's the texture, the color. The granite stones, millions of them, are mostly gray, but flecked with quartz and feldspar that catch the morning light, giving them a subtle sparkle, a kind of ancient, stony glitter. They are not uniform. These stones, some are relatively small, easily hefted by one person. Others are substantial blocks that would have required considerable effort from several strong individuals, or some very clever engineering to maneuver into place. And that's the real kicker. The fact that has astounded observers for centuries. They are all stacked, fitted, and balanced without a single smear of mortar or cement to bind them. This is the hallmark of Great Zimbabwe. The masterful dry stone construction. No sticky stuff, just incredible skill, impeccable geometry, and, presumably, a lot of patience. My IKEA furniture barely stays together with screws and those little wooden dowel thingies. These guys were playing 3D Tetris on a god-tier level. You walk closer to one of the immense curving walls that define what is known as the Great Enclosure. We'll get more into the specifics of that area later. But for now, just absorb its presence. The curve is gentle, almost elegant, a stark contrast to the rugged individual stones that form it. It's a flowing, organic line in a medium that is inherently rigid and unyielding. It makes you wonder about the minds that designed this. Were they seeking to mimic the rounded shapes of the natural granite copias, the small hills that dot this landscape? Or was there a symbolic reason? A cosmological blueprint being mapped onto the earth? Or perhaps they just really disliked sharp corners. Whatever the reason, the effect is captivating. The walls don't just divide space, they sculpt it. You reach out again, just as you did in the twilight. But now, in the full light of day, the experience is different. The stone is cool to the touch, the coolness of something that has absorbed the night air deep within its mass. You can feel the slight variations in the surfaces of the individual blocks, some weathered smoother than others, some still retaining a rougher, more recently split texture. Recently, in geological or archaeological terms, of course, meaning a few centuries ago. You trace the almost invisible seams between them. The fit is so precise in many places that you couldn't slip a knife blade between them. Think about the planning, the selection of each stone, perhaps shaping it just so, to nestle perfectly against its neighbors. It's a colossal, three-dimensional jigsaw puzzle, assembled by master craftsmen. The sheer amount of stone is staggering. Estimates suggest that the stone used in the Great Enclosure alone is comparable to the amount used in the construction of some of the smaller Egyptian pyramids. And this is just one part of a much larger complex. There's the hill complex, perched dramatically atop a steep granite dome, its walls incorporating natural boulders into their defensive and symbolic lines. Then there are the valley ruins, a series of further enclosures sprawling between the hill and the Great Enclosure, walls everywhere, walls defining spaces, walls creating passages, walls asserting presence. Without a detailed map and a good sense of direction, you'd be wandering these interlocking enclosures for days. It's like a stone maze designed by someone who really didn't want unexpected guests showing up for tea unannounced. Or maybe just had a significant surplus of granite and an equally significant amount of time on their hands. The sun climbs higher, and the air begins to warm. Birds flit around the tops of the walls, their bright calls echoing slightly in the enclosed spaces. Insects hum. The wind, a constant presence on the exposed plateau, whispers and sighs as it navigates these ancient barriers. Otherwise, there's a profound stillness. The hustle and bustle of the city that once thrived here, a population estimated to be as many as 18,000 to 20,000 people at its peak, is long gone, leaving only these silent stone guardians. You try to imagine the sounds that would have filled this space, the chattering of voices in the Shona language, the cries of vendors, the clang of iron tools from blacksmiths, the lowing of cattle, the laughter of children. It's a ghost symphony, played only in the theater of your imagination. One of the truly mind-boggling aspects is not just the scale, but the sustained effort over generations. These structures weren't thrown up in a single burst of enthusiastic construction. The building of Great Zimbabwe spanned centuries, from around the 11th to the mid-15th century. Think about the societal organization required to quarry the stone, transport it often from several kilometers away, shape it, and then meticulously construct these edifices. Imagine the project manager. Okay, team, another 10,000 stones before lunch. And no, we don't have forklifts. Wheelbarrows hadn't made it this far south yet. Apparently, use your core strength and try not to drop any on your foot. Our healthcare plan is a bit rudimentary. It speaks of a stable, prosperous society with strong leadership and a shared vision, able to mobilize and direct vast resources of labor and skill, a quirky idea that has been floated by some, particularly in earlier, more romantically inclined phases of archaeological interpretation, is the notion that some of the walls and features within Great Zimbabwe might have been deliberately aligned with astronomical events, solstices, equinoxes, or specific stellar risings, while direct, indisputable proof of complex, intentional archaeoastronomy on par with, say, Stonehenge, is still a subject of much discussion and requires more rigorous evidence. It's an intriguing thought. Were they tracking the seasons through stone alignments to guide their agricultural cycles? Or were certain celestial events considered spiritually significant, their observation marked by the very architecture of the city? Or, to play devil's advocate with a gentle smile, sometimes an aesthetically pleasing rock casting a cool shadow at a certain time of day is just an aesthetically pleasing rock doing its thing. Still, the possibility adds another layer of potential meaning to these already enigmatic structures. You walk along the base of a particularly high section of wall, feeling dwarfed. The sheer verticality is almost intimidating. You notice how the walls are often built in layers, or courses, of these granite bricks. They are not perfectly horizontal. These courses, they follow the lie of the land, undulating gently, giving the walls an almost living quality, as if they are breathing with the earth itself. This adaptability to the terrain is another hallmark of the builder's skill. They weren't imposing a rigid, preconceived geometry onto the landscape, but rather working with it, integrating their monumental vision into the existing natural forms. This brings us to a point that keeps researchers busy. Archaeologists continue to debate the precise sequence of construction for the various major wall systems within Great Zimbabwe. And indeed, even the methods and social organization that enabled such massive undertakings. Was it a slow, organic growth, with new sections added as the population expanded or needs changed? Or were there distinct phases of large-scale, planned construction, perhaps initiated by powerful rulers wishing to leave their mark radiocarbon dating of materials found in association with the walls, and careful analysis of building styles? Because yes, even in dry stone walling, there are stylistic variations that can indicate different periods or groups of builders, help to piece together the timeline. But the full story, the exact order of operations, the specific gangs of masons and their foremen, remains a complex puzzle with many pieces still waiting to be perfectly fitted. The experts generally agree on the main time frame, roughly 1100 to 1450 AD, but beyond that broad consensus, the details can become a delightful free-for-all of academic theories and spirited discussion, which, of course, is wonderful. It keeps the mystery alive and ensures that Great Zimbabwe continues to be a subject of active research and fascination, and probably keeps a fair few historians and archaeologists gainfully employed. As you look at these unyielding, ancient structures, you realize they are more than just barriers or fortifications. They are an expression of identity, a symbol of power, a monumental feat of engineering, and a work of art, all rolled into one. They are a declaration in stone: we were here, we achieved this. Remember us. And even after centuries of silence, even after the city was abandoned and fell into ruin, its voice, through these incredible walls, still speaks with undeniable power. The initial impact is one of scale and sheer improbability, but as you continue to look, a deeper appreciation for the artistry and the immense human endeavor begins to dawn. These aren't just rocks piled up. This is a legacy carefully, painstakingly, and beautifully crafted. And you've only just begun to scratch the surface of their complexity. The way they were built is a marvel, but what they were built for, and the secrets held within their patterns and unique features, are stories for the path ahead. Indeed, these walls are a legacy, and understanding how they were built is the first step to truly appreciating their genius. You've seen their scale, felt their presence. Now, let's draw a little closer, perhaps with a metaphorical magnifying glass, and peer into the very essence of their construction, the dry stone secret that allowed these structures to rise and endure. It's a technique that sounds deceptively simple, yet its execution here at Great Zimbabwe is nothing short of breathtaking. So, what exactly is this dry stone method we keep mentioning? In essence, it's the art of building with stone without using any mortar or binding agent to hold the individual pieces together. No cement, no lime, no sticky mud acting as ancient superglue. Instead, the stability of the wall comes from the careful selection and placement of each stone, the friction between them, and the masterful use of gravity. Good old, reliable gravity. Always there for you, especially when you're trying to build a 10-meter-high wall that you really don't want to fall over. It's like playing Jenga, but on a national monument scale, with pieces that weigh hundreds of pounds. And if you make a mistake, you don't just sheepishly rebuild the tower. You probably get reassigned to something less architecturally critical, like extremely distant goat herding. The pressure was likely immense, both literally and figuratively. Now, you might wonder, why no mortar? Was it a deliberate choice? Or did they simply lack the materials or knowledge to make it? The area around Great Zimbabwe is rich in granite, but not so much in limestone, which is key for producing traditional lime mortar. So, availability might have played a part, but it's also very likely that the builders mastered the dry stone technique to such a degree that mortar became unnecessary, perhaps even undesirable for their specific designs and environment. They effectively said, "Mortar. Where we're going, we don't need mortar. Just a really good eye, a strong back, and the uncanny ability to convince several million tons of granite to stay perfectly in place through sheer willpower and clever physics." Let's talk about the star of the show, the granite itself. This wasn't just any old rock they were piling up. The local granite around Great Zimbabwe has a particularly obliging characteristic. It tends to exfoliate. Imagine it like an onion, with layers that can peel off. Due to weathering processes, and possibly some clever human intervention, like controlled heating and cooling, the granite often splits into reasonably regular flattish blocks. This natural cleaving property, this tendency to break along predictable planes, meant the builders often had a head start. They weren't always dealing with awkwardly round boulders that would wobble like a weeble. They had access to stone slabs that were already partly shaped by nature, making them easier to stack. It was the easy to work with, comes in surprisingly convenient slab-like pieces addition of geological resources, kind of like ancient geological IKEA, but the flat pack delivery involved a bit more hauling, and the assembly instructions were probably passed down through generations, rather than printed on a flimsy leaflet with a tiny Allen key. The builders of Great Zimbabwe became experts at exploiting this. They knew how to read the stone, how to identify the best pieces, and how to work them with the tools they had. What were those tools? Think less power drills and laser levels, and more about the ingenious application of simpler technology. Stone hammer axes, dolerite wedges, and possibly iron tools for finer splitting and shaping. There's ongoing research into this, but the evidence points to a sophisticated understanding of stone properties. Experts continue to explore the extent to which fire setting was used to quarry and shape the granite blocks, versus relying primarily on natural fracturing and weathering processes. Fire setting involves heating the rock with intense fire and then rapidly cooling it with water, causing it to crack. It's an ancient technique, effective, but requiring considerable skill and resources, like a massive amount of firewood. Imagine the logistics. All right, lads. Who's on firewood duty today? We've got a few thousand tons of mountain to gently persuade into brick shapes. Once the stones were quarried and roughly shaped, the real artistry began. This wasn't just about piling them high. It was about creating a stable, interlocking structure. The builders would carefully select each stone, considering its size, shape, and weight. They'd place it, perhaps test its fit, maybe trim an edge here or there with a few deft blows, ensuring it rested snugly against its neighbors. They understood the importance of breaking joints, avoiding long, continuous vertical gaps that could create weak points. You'll often see longer stones, known as through stones or bonding stones, laid perpendicular to the face of the wall, extending deeper into its core to tie the outer facings together and improve stability. It's a bit like weaving, but with multi-ton granite blocks. One of the key features you'll notice in many of the walls, especially the taller, freestanding ones, is a slight inward slope, known as batter. The walls are thicker at the base and become gradually thinner towards the top. This isn't an accident or a sign of shoddy workmanship. It's a deliberate engineering choice. That gentle incline significantly enhances the wall's stability, ensuring its center of gravity remains well within its footprint, making it much more resistant to toppling over. It's subtle, but it's engineering genius at work, using the inherent weight of the stones to lock the whole structure together. And how did they achieve those beautiful, sweeping curves we talked about earlier? Not with complex mathematical formulas plotted on a computer, but likely with ropes, pegs, and an incredibly good eye. They would lay out the desired curve on the ground and then build upwards, course by course, making tiny adjustments to each stone's position to maintain the elegant arc. This required immense patience and a shared understanding among the building teams. It's one thing to build a straight wall. It's another entirely to execute these vast, flowing curves with such precision, using only basic tools and the power of human coordination. Think of it as conducting an orchestra, where each mason plays their part to perfection to create the overall symphony in stone. The advantages of this dry stone technique, especially in this environment, are numerous. Firstly, durability. The proof is right there in front of you. These walls have stood for the better part of a millennium, weathering seasonal rains, baking sun, and the inevitable slow march of vegetation trying to reclaim its territory. Mortared walls can trap moisture, which can then freeze and thaw in cooler upland climates, though freezing isn't a major issue here. Extreme temperature shifts are leading to cracking and degradation. Dry stone walls, however, are permeable. Rainwater can drain right through them, preventing the buildup of hydrostatic pressure that can bulge or even collapse a solid, mortared structure. This also means the walls can breathe. Secondly, flexibility. A dry stone wall isn't entirely rigid. It can accommodate minor shifts in the ground or slight settling over time without catastrophic failure. The individual stones can move ever so slightly in relation to each other, adjusting to stresses in a way a mortared wall cannot. This doesn't mean they were expecting earthquakes every Tuesday, but it does lend an inherent resilience to the structures. It's like the difference between a stiff, old tree that might snap in a gale and a more supple one that sways and gives with the wind. You might have heard stories or local legends, as often happens with achievements that border on the miraculous, hinting at more than just human skill. Some oral traditions, when speaking of the construction of such monumental stoneworks in southern Africa, sometimes allude to the idea that the builders possessed a special understanding of the stone, almost as if they could talk to it, or that certain rituals imbued the process with a kind of magic, making the stones lighter or more compliant. While these are beautiful, folkloric expressions of awe, the real magic, of course, lay in generations of accumulated knowledge, keen observation, and extraordinary craftsmanship. But it's a charming thought. A master mason whispering to a particularly stubborn block of granite, "Now, be a good chap and just nestle in there nicely, won't you? There's a spot with your name on it. If my attempts at DIY involved singing to the components, the resulting structure would probably collapse out of sheer embarrassment or musical offense, while dry stone construction is found in many parts of the world, from the field walls of the Irish countryside to the terracing of Machu Picchu in Peru. The sheer scale, the elegant curvature, and the specific stylistic features of the walls at Great Zimbabwe make them unique. They represent a pinnacle of this particular architectural tradition, a distinctive Zimbabwean architectural voice. The builders here weren't just stacking stones against a hillside to make a terrace. They were creating vast, freestanding enclosures, complex passageways, and towering edifices that dominated their landscape and proclaimed their society's power and ingenuity. Consider the different styles of walling you might observe as you explore further. Some sections exhibit incredibly neat, regular courses of similarly sized, well-dressed stones, almost like precision-cut bricks. These are often found in the most prominent structures, like the Great Enclosure. In other areas, perhaps older sections or those with a more utilitarian purpose, the stonework might appear more random, using a wider variety of stone shapes and sizes, what's sometimes called random rubble masonry. These variations aren't necessarily indicative of lesser skill, but perhaps different phases of construction, different functions, or even different teams of builders with their own particular styles. It's like looking at handwriting. You can tell it's the same language, but different authors have their own flair. Historians still argue whether these stylistic variations represent distinct chronological periods, different social status of the areas enclosed, or simply the availability of stone and specific functional requirements. It's another layer of the puzzle, another subtle clue whispered by the silent stones. So, the secret of the dry stone walls isn't some lost mystical formula. It's a combination of the right material, that cooperative local granite, incredible human ingenuity in understanding its properties and how to work it, sophisticated engineering principles like batter and bonding, learned through observation and experience, and immense, sustained, organized labor. It's a testament to what people can achieve when they combine deep knowledge of their environment with a powerful, creative, and communal vision. As you continue to gaze at these walls, let the absence of mortar sink in. It's not a lack, it's a mastery, a quiet, confident statement that they knew exactly what they were doing, and they did it beautifully. The result is an architectural marvel that feels both immensely powerful and surprisingly organic, as if the stones themselves chose to come together in these harmonious and imposing forms. And this fundamental technique underpins everything else you are about to see. That sense of the stones choosing to come together, forming those harmonious and imposing walls, is a beautiful way to think about it. But of course, we know that behind that seemingly organic assembly was an immense amount of human intention, labor, and incredible skill, starting long before the first stone was ever laid in a wall. This fundamental dry stone technique you've been learning about, the one that underpins the entire magnificent structure of Great Zimbabwe, depended entirely on a steady, almost unimaginable supply of suitable stone. So, let's trace the journey of that granite, from its rugged, natural state, nestled in the earth, to the precisely shaped block, ready for the shaper's hand and its final place in history. First things first, where did all this stone come from? You don't just conjure millions of granite blocks out of thin air, even if you are building a city that feels quite magical. The granite used for Great Zimbabwe was quarried from the surrounding hills, with evidence of ancient quarry sites still visible today. These aren't vast, gaping industrial pits like modern quarries, but more subtle indentations and worked rock faces on the local granite kopjes, those characteristic dome-shaped hills that dot the landscape. The builders were practical. They sourced their primary material as close to the construction sites as possible to minimize the Herculean task of transportation. This wasn't a pop down to the ancient equivalent of a builder's yard for a bag of rocks kind of situation. This was more akin to gently, or perhaps not so gently, persuade an entire mountainside to share its stony bounty, one multi-ton chunk at a time. So, how did they extract these colossal amounts of granite? We touched on fire setting in the previous section as a shaping method, but it was also a primary quarrying technique. Imagine the scene workers would build roaring fires against a rock face. Once the granite was intensely hot, they would douse it with cold water. The rapid temperature change would cause the outer layers of the rock to crack and split, often along its natural grain or existing fissures. It's a bit like when you pour cold water into a very hot glass dish. Crack, except on a geological scale, and the crack might yield several tons of usable material. This process, repeated over and over, allowed them to break down large exposures of granite into more manageable, if still enormous, pieces. They also became masters at exploiting the natural exfoliation we talked about, those onion-like layers of granite. They would look for sections of rock that were already starting to peel or weather away, identify existing joints and weaknesses, and then use stone or dolerite wedges, and possibly later, iron wedges, to prise the slabs apart. These wedges would be hammered into cracks, and the immense splitting force exerted would gradually detach large sections of stone. Debate continues among researchers regarding the primary methods of granite block detachment at the quarry sites, whether natural exfoliation provided the bulk of the material, or if more intensive human quarrying techniques like large-scale fire setting were predominant for the sheer volume required. It was likely a combination of both, a pragmatic approach using whatever method best suited the specific rock formation and the desired size of the blocks. They weren't just hacking away randomly. They were reading the rock, understanding its structure, and working with its inherent properties. It's even been suggested, as a somewhat quirky or fringe tidbit, that sound or percussion might have played a role in their quarrying and initial shaping process. Experienced quarrymen, by tapping a rock surface with a hammerstone, could supposedly listen to the stone, identifying internal flaws or the best lines along which it would naturally cleave. It's a fascinating idea, this intimate, almost auditory connection with the material, as if the stone itself was guiding their efforts. Whether it was truly a formal technique or just the ingrained intuition of master craftsmen, it speaks to a profound understanding of their medium. It certainly beats my method of finding a stud in the wall, which mostly involves random tapping and hoping for the best, usually with minimal success. Once these massive chunks of granite were detached, the next monumental challenge was getting them from the quarry to the building site. We're talking about blocks weighing anywhere from a few 100 pounds to several tons. And remember, the wheel wasn't used for transport in this part of Africa at that time, and draft animals like oxen, while present in the society for other purposes, don't seem to have been the primary movers of these colossal stones, especially up the steep slopes of places like the hill complex. So, how did they do it? The answer, almost certainly, is sheer human muscle power incredible organization, and probably some ingenious low-tech solutions. Imagine teams of workers, chanting in rhythm perhaps, straining together to move these blocks. They might have used wooden levers to lift and maneuver them, and possibly dragged them on rollers made of logs, or on rudimentary sledges over prepared tracks. It would have been slow, arduous, back-breaking work. This was the ancient world's most intense full-body workout, an involuntary gym membership where the weights were enormous. The gym was a sun-baked granite hill, and your personal trainer was probably a very stern foreman with an unyielding daily quota. The logistics of coordinating these teams, clearing paths, and ensuring a steady flow of material to the builders must have been a masterpiece of project management in itself. No Amazon Prime, same-day delivery for 1,000-pound granite blocks back then. Just pure, unadulterated human effort, determination, group coordination, and probably some very good, high-energy snacks for motivation. Maybe sorghum porridge or dried fruits. And what about shaping the stone more precisely, once it reached the vicinity of the actual construction? While the natural cleaving of the granite and the fire setting often produced fairly regular, flattish blocks, many still required further dressing to achieve that characteristic smooth face and tight fit you see in the walls. This is where the shaper's hand truly came into its own. Using hammerstones, essentially hard, rounded stones used to chip away at the granite, and possibly more refined stone chisels, or even early iron tools in later periods, skilled masons would meticulously work the surfaces of the blocks. They would knock off irregularities, square up edges, and sometimes even create that slight curvature on the face of the stones that contributes to the overall aesthetic of the walls. You can see different degrees of finish. Some walls, particularly the outer faces of the most important enclosures like the Great Enclosure, are remarkably smooth and uniform, with blocks of similar height laid in neat courses. This suggests a high level of skill and a significant investment of time in dressing each stone. Other walls, perhaps internal divisions or earlier constructions, might use rougher, less uniformly shaped blocks. These weren't just any stone shapers. These were the bespoke tailors of the rock world. You can almost imagine a lead mason inspecting a block. A little more off this side, I think. And does Sir prefer his ceremonial megalith with a slightly beveled edge today, or the more rustic, just wrestled from the mountain look? The precision involved in shaping these blocks to fit so snugly without mortar is truly astounding, especially when you consider the tools they had. Getting those complex, often slightly irregular, puzzle pieces to interlock perfectly, maintaining the structural integrity and the desired aesthetic, all without laser levels or sophisticated measuring devices, relied on an incredibly well-developed sense of spatial awareness, an artist's eye, and generations of passed-down skill. My own attempts to hang a picture frame perfectly straight, even with a spirit level, often end in a slightly skewed perspective and a few extra holes in the wall. I suspect I wouldn't have made the grade on the Great Zimbabwe wall-building team. Perhaps I'd be on snack duty. And what about the stones that didn't make the cut? The ones that cracked incorrectly during quarrying, or were deemed unsuitable for the fine work on the main walls? You have to wonder if they had a designated reject pile, a kind of stony equivalent to the bloopers reel for aspiring wall components. The naughty stone corner, where geologically grumpy boulders or awkwardly shaped slabs went to think about their lack of cooperation. More likely, these less-than-perfect stones weren't simply discarded if they could be used. They might have formed part of the inner core of the thick walls, where their irregular shapes wouldn't compromise the overall stability or the external aesthetic. Or they might have been used for less prestigious structures, foundations, or even broken down further into smaller pieces for paving or other purposes. Efficiency and resourcefulness would have been paramount in an undertaking of this magnitude. So, the journey of each granite block, from a silent, immovable part of a hillside to a perfectly placed component in one of Great Zimbabwe's majestic walls, was an epic in itself. It involved danger, immense physical exertion, and a sophisticated understanding of geology, engineering, and logistics. It was a process that transformed raw nature into enduring culture, embodying the skill, patience, and collective will of the people who built this extraordinary place. The shaper's hand, guided by centuries of tradition and an innate feel for the stone, left an indelible mark, not just on the granite, but on the landscape of human history. And as you stand there, running your hand over the cool, dressed surface of a wall that has stood for centuries, you're touching the culmination of that incredible journey. And as you stand there, running your hand over that cool, dressed surface, feeling the echoes of that incredible journey from raw hillside to perfectly placed wall component, your gaze is inevitably drawn towards the most massive and iconic of Great Zimbabwe's structures. It's time to step out of the general appreciation of the stonemason's art and venture into the heart of the legend itself, the Great Enclosure. This is the structure that often appears in photographs, the one whose sheer scale and elegant curving walls have puzzled and captivated people for generations. You find yourself approaching it now, a monumental elliptical structure that seems to swell from the earth. Even from the outside, its presence is overwhelming. The main outer wall, the one we've glimpsed before, now confronts you in its full, unapologetic grandeur. It's not just a wall, it's a statement, a declaration of power, of engineering prowess, of a society at the peak of its confidence. Remember those dimensions, up to 11 meters high, perhaps 5 or 6 meters thick at its base. It curves away from you in both directions, a seemingly endless river of stone, its surface a tapestry of carefully chosen and fitted granite blocks, all gleaming softly in the African sun. There are no battlements, no arrow slits, none of the overtly defensive features you might associate with a European castle of a similar period. This suggests a different kind of power, perhaps one less reliant on overt threat and more on undeniable prestige and the control of sacred or vital space. Finding an entrance isn't immediately obvious. The wall is so continuous, so imposing, that the openings are relatively discreet, almost like secret invitations into a hidden world. You follow the curve, anticipation building, until you spot one, a narrow gap, a deliberate interruption in the otherwise seamless stone. As you pass through it, you feel a distinct shift. The sounds of the outside world, the wind in the acacia trees, the distant bird calls become instantly more subdued. The temperature seems to drop a degree or two. You've crossed a threshold, not just into a building, but into a different realm. You half expect a velvet rope and a very serious-looking individual in historically appropriate attire asking if your name's on the list. Sorry, esteemed members of the elite Shona royalty and their immediate entourage only this evening. Commoners' entrance is, well, somewhere else, far away, and then you are inside. You stop, instinctively, trying to take it all in. You are standing in a vast, open area, completely encircled by that same monumental wall you just admired from the outside. Now, however, it towers above you, curving majestically around you, its top edge a clean, undulating line against the brilliant blue sky. Being inside is like being hugged by a very large, very stony, and slightly aloof giant, a comforting, protective, yet undeniably imposing embrace. The sheer quantity of stone surrounding you is almost dizzying. The great enclosure is, in fact, the largest single ancient structure in sub-Saharan Africa, with its outer wall snaking around for a circumference of about 255 meters, or nearly 840 feet. That's longer than 2.5 football fields laid end to end, all made of meticulously stacked granite. You could probably play a truly epic game of hide-and-seek in here, though you'd definitely want to be a hider, not the seeker. You'd be shouting Marco for days, getting only the faintest polo, echoing back from some distant, undiscovered corner. Still hiding, and I've found some fascinating lichens. Your eyes begin to pick out details within this vast, elliptical space. The inner face of the great outer wall is just as impressively constructed as its exterior. The courses of granite blocks rise with a beautiful, almost hypnotic regularity in many sections. You notice that you're not just in one simple open space. There are other walls within this main enclosure, older, more weathered, creating a complex series of smaller enclosures and passages. The most famous of these is the parallel passage, a narrow corridor that runs for a considerable distance between the towering main outer wall and an earlier, still substantial inner wall. Walking through it feels like being in a stone canyon. The walls so close on either side you could stretch out your arms and almost touch both. The acoustics in here are different again. Your footsteps echoing softly. Your voice, if you were to speak, hushed and close. Historians and archaeologists believe this passage might have been a controlled processional route, or perhaps a way to segregate different parts of the enclosure, limiting access to more sacred or private areas within, and then dominating one section of the enclosure. Your eyes are drawn to another iconic feature, though we'll explore it in much more detail very soon, the conical tower. Even from a distance, its perfect, slightly tapering circular form is striking, so different from the curving linearity of the walls. It stands silent and enigmatic, its purpose one of Great Zimbabwe's most enduring mysteries. For now, just register its presence. Another key player in this extraordinary stone theater. Scattered across the ground within the great enclosure, you'd see the remains of numerous circular structures made of daga, a type of clay used for building huts. These are the ghostly footprints of the homes and living spaces of the people who once inhabited this elite compound. The stone walls provided the grand framework, the impressive shell. But daily life happened in these daga structures. Archaeologists have excavated these hut foundations, finding evidence of hearths, pottery, and other domestic items, helping to piece together a picture of who lived here and how. Imagine these spaces bustling with activity, the sounds of cooking, conversation, children playing, all within the protective embrace of these colossal stone ramparts. The original open-plan living, perhaps, just with more skillfully applied mud, fewer internal divisions, and probably fewer arguments about who left the TV remote on the leopard skin rug, mostly because televisions, and probably even remotes, were a few centuries off. The atmosphere within the great enclosure is unique. There's a sense of profound quiet, yet it's a silence filled with unspoken stories. The sheer mass of stone seems to absorb sound, creating an introspective, almost reverent ambiance. The light, too, plays a significant role. Depending on the time of day, shadows will stretch and shrink, highlighting different textures on the walls, creating an ever-changing visual experience. You can imagine how different it would feel at midday, with the sun directly overhead, versus the soft light of dawn or the long shadows of late afternoon. It makes you wonder if the builders considered this interplay of light and shadow in their design. Given the artistry evident everywhere else, it wouldn't be surprising. What was this incredible place for the current consensus is that the great enclosure was a royal residence, a palace for the rulers of Great Zimbabwe, and also likely a significant religious and ceremonial center. The scale, the restricted access, the presence of high-status imported goods like Chinese celadon and Persian faience found during excavations all point to its use by a powerful elite. But archaeologists and anthropologists continue to debate the precise social structure and daily life of the elite who resided within the great enclosure, piecing together clues from hut layouts, artifacts, and the very architecture itself to understand the hierarchy, the rituals, and the day-to-day existence within these imposing walls. Were there specific areas for the king, for his family, for advisors, for religious practitioners? How did they interact with the broader population living outside these walls? The stones hold their secrets closely, of course, over the years, especially before rigorous archaeological investigation became the norm. The great enclosure attracted its fair share of rather more imaginative, if less supportable, theories about its purpose. This brings us to a rather quirky or fringe tidbit, some early, wildly off-base speculation, fueled by a desire to find something exotic and perhaps a refusal to credit local ingenuity, suggested the great enclosure might have been a vast gold-smelting operation, or even, rather charmingly, a gigantic, high-security cattle kraal for a fabulously wealthy king's prize herd. You can almost picture it. Bartholomew, old chap, fetch the royal cattle. They do so enjoy their constitutional within the 36-foot-high mortarless stone enclosure. Keeps them safe from, well, very ambitious lions. I suppose, needless to say, the archaeological evidence firmly points towards human habitation and complex symbolic functions, not industrial-scale smelting or excessively pampered livestock. As you stand in the center of this vast space, turning slowly, you get a true sense of being enclosed, yet not claustrophobically so. The sky above is a huge open dome, a counterpoint to the encircling stone. It's a masterpiece of spatial design, creating a world within a world. You can only imagine the impression it must have made on visitors in its heyday. Traders from distant lands, emissaries from other kingdoms. It would have been an awe-inspiring display of power, wealth, and sophisticated culture. Imagine trying to get a decent Wi-Fi signal in here, though, one bar. No, wait, That's just a particularly tall and well-placed rock. This was the original digital detox, by necessity rather than choice. The craftsmanship is everywhere you look, from the grand sweep of the main wall to the careful construction of the internal divisions. It's a place that invites contemplation, that makes you ponder the lives lived within its embrace, the decisions made, the ceremonies performed. The great enclosure is more than just an architectural marvel. It's a profound statement about a society's ability to shape its environment, to create meaning through structure, and to build for an eternity that, in many ways, it has achieved. The wind whispers around the tops of the walls, perhaps carrying faint echoes of those ancient times, a soft sigh from a long-vanished world. And still, the most iconic feature within this enclosure, that silent stone sentinel, the conical tower, awaits your closer inspection. That soft sigh from a long-vanished world seems to draw you forward, pulling your attention from the grand sweep of the encircling walls towards that silent stone sentinel you glimpsed earlier. The conical tower, it stands apart, even within this remarkable enclosure, possessing an aura of singular importance and profound mystery. As you approach it, its form becomes clearer, more defined, and somehow even more enigmatic. It's one of those structures that doesn't just occupy space, it commands it, drawing your thoughts and questions towards its silent, impassive surface. It rises from a carefully leveled platform, a perfect, slightly tapering cylinder of stone, reaching a height of around 11 meters, that's about 36 feet, with a diameter at its base of roughly 5.5 meters, or 18 feet. Unlike the walls, which define and enclose space, the conical tower is almost entirely solid. The conical tower is a solid stone structure, approximately 11 meters high and 5.5 meters in diameter at its base, built with meticulous dry stone masonry. You walk around its circumference, your hand trailing along the remarkably smooth and even stonework. The quality of construction here is exceptional, even by the high standards seen elsewhere in Great Zimbabwe. The individual granite blocks are relatively uniform in size and expertly laid in precise, level courses. It's a masterpiece of dry stone art, a testament to the skill of its builders. You tap it gently here and there, half expecting a section to grind open, revealing a hidden passage or a secret chamber. Nope. Solid as a very large, very solid cone of beautifully worked granite. No hidden staircases to a long-lost king's treasury or a mystical oracle's inner sanctum here. Unfortunately, if you were hoping for a guided tour of the interior, I'm afraid you're out of luck. Unless you're a very small, very determined termite with a diamond-tipped drill bit and a lot of time on your hands. Entry is not just forbidden. It's structurally impossible. This very solidity is, of course, one of its most puzzling aspects. If it's not a watchtower, no way to get to the top. Not a tomb, no burial chamber within, and not a conventional building for shelter or storage, no internal space, then what on earth was it for? This is the conical tower's central riddle, the question that has intrigued and baffled archaeologists, historians, and visitors for over a century. Theories about its purpose range from the deeply symbolic and culturally profound to the, shall we say, more pragmatically imaginative. It's archaeology's ultimate, what is this elegantly constructed, rather large, and conspicuously solid thingy? And why did they put it right here? One of the most enduring interpretations is that the conical tower served as a symbolic granary. In Shona society, then and now, grain, particularly millet and sorghum, represents wealth, sustenance, and the chief's ability to provide for his people. A large, well-filled granary is a potent symbol of prosperity and good governance. So, this massive stone granary, too solid to hold actual grain, might have stood as a powerful, permanent representation of the king's bounty, his control over resources, and the agricultural richness of his domain. It's like a giant stone exclamation mark proclaiming, "We are thriving. Our harvests are plentiful. The king is great." A sort of ancient world humble brag, but on a monumental scale. Another prominent theory, often discussed, suggests the tower may have had phallic connotations, symbolizing the king's virility, the strength of his lineage, and the continuity of the dynasty. In many cultures, such symbols are associated with power, fertility, and the enduring life of the community. Given the tower's potent, singular form, standing tall within the main royal enclosure, this interpretation certainly carries a certain symbolic resonance. It's a bold statement, if you will. Then, there are ideas linking it to ancestral veneration or specific ritual practices. Could it have been a focal point for ceremonies, a sacred object embodying the spirit of the community or the ancestors? Its careful placement, the sheer effort involved in its construction, and its unique form all suggest it was far more than just decorative. It meant something deeply important. Perhaps it was considered a conduit to the spiritual world, or a representation of a sacred mountain or other natural feature. The top of the tower, now somewhat weathered and partly reconstructed, is thought to have originally featured a decorative frieze, possibly a chevron pattern similar to that found on some sections of the main enclosure walls. This would have added another layer of aesthetic refinement and symbolic meaning, further emphasizing its importance. Trying to decipher that meaning now is like trying to read a book with most of the pages missing. You get tantalizing glimpses, but the full narrative remains elusive. Of course, as with any good mystery, there have been some rather more, let's call them creative, interpretations over the years, especially in the early days of European encounter with the site. For a rather quirky or fringe tidbit, one of the more outlandish and now thoroughly discredited early theories was that the tower might have been some sort of ancient furnace or a sophisticated smelting chimney. This idea completely ignored its solid construction, the lack of any associated industrial waste, and the sheer impracticality of such a design for metallurgical purposes. It was a classic case of trying to fit a square peg into a round hole, or, in this case, trying to turn a solid cone of stone into a hollow industrial facility through sheer force of imagination. Thankfully, more scientific archaeology has long since laid such notions to rest, though it does make for an amusing footnote in the history of Zimbabwean archaeology, a reminder that sometimes, when faced with the truly unknown, the human mind can wander down some very peculiar paths. Yes, clearly, this 36-foot-high solid stone cone is for making toast. Really, really big toast. The truth is, despite all the research, all the analysis, all the thoughtful contemplation, the precise original purpose and meaning of the conical tower remain subjects of ongoing discussion. Scholars continue to debate vigorously whether the conical tower primarily symbolized royal authority, ancestral veneration, a bountiful harvest, dynastic continuity, or a complex combination of these, as its solid form offers few direct clues to its function, forcing reliance on ethnographic analogy, symbolism in Shona culture, and the broader archaeological context. It's this very ambiguity, this refusal to give up its secrets easily, that makes it so compelling. The tower is the strong, silent type. It stands there, impassive and majestic, its smooth gray surface reflecting the changing light, daring you to guess its ancient purpose, to unlock the riddle held within its stony heart. Imagine the people who built it, painstakingly selecting each stone, fitting it perfectly into place, slowly raising this extraordinary structure course by course. What was in their minds? What beliefs? What stories? What communal aspirations drove them to create something so unique, so devoid of obvious utility, yet so clearly imbued with profound significance? It's the ancient world's ultimate minimalist statement piece. No frills, no fuss, just pure, unadulterated, enigmatic coneness. It doesn't shout its meaning, it simply is, inviting you to project your own interpretations, to feel its silent power. You might notice smaller, similar though less grand conical structures or features in other parts of Great Zimbabwe or related sites, suggesting that this form held a particular significance within this cultural sphere. But none match the scale, the perfection, or the sheer presence of this one, here in the heart of the great enclosure. It feels like the definitive article, the archetype. As you continue to gaze at it, you appreciate not just its form, but its placement. It's not randomly situated. It's part of the carefully orchestrated spatial syntax of the great enclosure, a key focal point in a complex designed to impress, to control, and perhaps to facilitate communion with the sacred. The very air around it seems different, charged with a quiet intensity, even if we never know its exact meaning in the way we understand meaning today. Its power as a symbol, as a piece of monumental art, and as an architectural enigma is undeniable. It's a focal point for the imagination, a beautiful, silent puzzle that has captivated minds for centuries, and will likely continue to do so for centuries more. And as the sun moves across the sky, casting the tower's long shadow across the enclosure floor, you feel privileged to stand in its presence, another visitor in a long line stretching back through time, all pondering the riddle of its existence. That soft sigh from a long-vanished world seems to draw you forward, pulling your attention from the grand sweep of the encircling walls towards that silent, stone sentinel you glimpsed earlier. The conical tower. It stands apart, even within this remarkable enclosure, possessing an aura of singular importance and profound mystery. As you approach it, its form becomes clearer, more defined, and somehow even more enigmatic. It's one of those structures that doesn't just occupy space, it commands it, drawing your thoughts and questions towards its silent, impassive surface. It rises from a carefully leveled platform, a perfect, slightly tapering cylinder of stone, reaching a height of around 11 meters. That's about 36 feet, with a diameter at its base of roughly 5.5 meters, or 18 feet. Unlike the walls, which define and enclose space, the conical tower is almost entirely solid. The conical tower is a solid stone structure, approximately 11 meters high and 5.5 meters in diameter at its base, built with meticulous dry stone masonry. You walk around its circumference, your hand trailing along the remarkably smooth and even stonework. The quality of construction here is exceptional, even by the high standards seen elsewhere in Great Zimbabwe. The individual granite blocks are relatively uniform in size and expertly laid in precise, level courses. It's a masterpiece of dry stone art, a testament to the skill of its builders. You tap it gently here and there, half expecting a section to grind open, revealing a hidden passage or a secret chamber. Nope. Solid as a very large, very solid cone of beautifully worked granite. No hidden staircases to a long-lost king's treasury or a mystical oracle's inner sanctum here. Unfortunately, if you were hoping for a guided tour of the interior, I'm afraid you're out of luck. Unless you're a very small, very determined termite with a diamond-tipped drill bit and a lot of time on your hands. Entry is not just forbidden, it's structurally impossible. This very solidity is, of course, one of its most puzzling aspects. If it's not a watchtower, no way to get to the top. Not a tomb, no burial chamber within, and not a conventional building for shelter or storage, no hut, no internal space. Then what on earth was it for? This is the conical tower's central riddle, the question that has intrigued and baffled archaeologists, historians, and visitors for over a century. Theories about its purpose range from the deeply symbolic and culturally profound to the, shall we say, more pragmatically imaginative. It's archaeology's ultimate, what is this elegantly constructed, rather large, and conspicuously solid thingy? And why did they put it right here? One of the most enduring interpretations is that the conical tower served as a symbolic granary. In Shona society, then and now, grain, particularly millet and sorghum, represents wealth, sustenance, and the chief's ability to provide for his people. A large, well-filled granary is a potent symbol of prosperity and good governance. So, this massive stone granary, too solid to hold actual grain, might have stood as a powerful permanent representation of the king's bounty, his control over resources, and the agricultural richness of his domain. It's like a giant stone exclamation mark, proclaiming, "We are thriving. Our harvests are plentiful. The king is great." A sort of ancient world humble brag, but on a monumental scale. Another prominent theory, often discussed, suggests the tower may have had phallic connotations, symbolizing the king's virility, the strength of his lineage, and the continuity of the dynasty. In many cultures, such symbols are associated with power, fertility, and the enduring life of the community, given the tower's potent, singular form. Standing tall within the main royal enclosure, this interpretation certainly carries a certain symbolic resonance. It's a bold statement, if you will. Then there are ideas linking it to ancestral veneration or specific ritual practices. Could it have been a focal point for ceremonies? A sacred object embodying the spirit of the community, or the ancestors, its careful placement. The sheer effort involved in its construction and its unique form all suggest it was far more than just decorative. It meant something deeply important. Perhaps it was considered a conduit to the spiritual world, or a representation of a sacred mountain or other natural feature. The top of the tower, now somewhat weathered and partly reconstructed, is thought to have originally featured a decorative frieze, possibly a chevron pattern similar to that found on some sections of the main enclosure walls. This would have added another layer of aesthetic refinement and symbolic meaning, further emphasizing its importance. Trying to decipher that meaning now is like trying to read a book with most of the pages missing. You get tantalizing glimpses, but the full narrative remains elusive. Of course, as with any good mystery, there have been some rather more, let's call them creative, interpretations over the years, especially in the early days of European encounter with the site, for a rather quirky or fringe tidbit. One of the more outlandish and now thoroughly discredited early theories was that the tower might have been some sort of ancient furnace or a sophisticated smelting chimney. This idea completely ignored its solid construction, the lack of any associated industrial waste, and the sheer impracticality of such a design for metallurgical purposes. It was a classic case of trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. Or, in this case, trying to turn a solid cone of stone into a hollow industrial facility through sheer force of imagination. Thankfully, more scientific archaeology has long since laid such notions to rest, though it does make for an amusing footnote in the history of Zimbabwean archaeology, a reminder that sometimes, when faced with the truly unknown, the human mind can wander down some very peculiar paths. Yes, clearly this 36-foot high solid stone cone is for making toast. Really, really big toast. The truth is, despite all the research, all the analysis, all the thoughtful contemplation, the precise original purpose and meaning of the conical tower remain subjects of ongoing discussion. Scholars continue to debate vigorously whether the conical tower primarily symbolized royal authority, ancestral veneration, a bountiful harvest, dynastic continuity, or a complex combination of these, as its solid form offers few direct clues to its function, forcing reliance on ethnographic analogy, symbolism in Shona culture, and the broader archaeological context. It's this very ambiguity, this refusal to give up its secrets easily, that makes it so compelling. The tower is the strong, silent type. It stands there, impassive and majestic, its smooth gray surface reflecting the changing light, daring you to guess its ancient purpose, to unlock the riddle held within its stony heart. Imagine the people who built it, painstakingly selecting each stone, fitting it perfectly into place, slowly raising this extraordinary structure course by course. What was in their minds? What beliefs? What stories? What communal aspirations drove them to create something so unique, so devoid of obvious utility, yet so clearly imbued with profound significance? It's the ancient world's ultimate minimalist statement piece. No frills, no fuss, just pure, unadulterated, enigmatic coneness. It doesn't shout its meaning. It simply is, inviting you to project your own interpretations, to feel its silent power. You might notice smaller, similar though less grand, conical structures or features in other parts of Great Zimbabwe or related sites, suggesting that this form held a particular significance within this cultural sphere, but none match the scale, the perfection, or the sheer presence of this one. Here in the heart of the great enclosure, it feels like the definitive article, the archetype. As you continue to gaze at it, you appreciate not just its form, but its placement. It's not randomly situated. It's part of the carefully orchestrated spatial syntax of the great enclosure, a key focal point in a complex designed to impress, to control, and perhaps to facilitate communion with the sacred. The very air around it seems different, charged with a quiet intensity, even if we never know its exact meaning in the way we understand meaning today. Its power as a symbol, as a piece of monumental art, and as an architectural enigma is undeniable. It's a focal point for the imagination, a beautiful, silent puzzle that has captivated minds for centuries and will likely continue to do so for centuries more. And as the sun moves across the sky, casting the tower's long shadow across the enclosure floor, you feel privileged to stand in its presence, another visitor in a long line stretching back through time, all pondering the riddle of its existence. The shadow of the conical tower, long and stark in the imagined afternoon sun, eventually coaxes your gaze away from its enigmatic form, back towards the broader tapestry of stone that surrounds you. You've marveled at the dry stone technique, traced the journey of the granite, stepped inside the imposing great enclosure, and pondered the riddle of its solid sentinel. But as you look around more discerningly, you begin to notice something else, something fundamental to understanding the architectural language of Great Zimbabwe. The walls themselves are not uniform. They are a symphony of variation, a dynamic landscape of thick and thin, high and low. These differences aren't accidental. They are deliberate, whispering clues about purpose, status, and the very way this ancient society organized its world. It seems the ancient architects and builders here weren't particularly keen on a one-size-fits-all philosophy when it came to wall construction. You won't find endless stretches of identical barriers. Instead, it's a nuanced design. You can almost hear a master builder musing. This particular area, the one defining the king's personal space perhaps, definitely calls for the full 11-meter-high, 6-meter-thick deluxe wall package, with all the trimmings. But over there, separating the kitchen yard from the ceremonial plaza, a jaunty 3-meter partition, elegantly curved, will do very nicely indeed. Thank you. Let's start with height. The walls of Great Zimbabwe vary significantly in height, with the main outer wall of the great enclosure, as you know, reaching that impressive 11 meters or about 36 feet in places, while internal dividing walls or those in some of the valley ruin complexes can be substantially lower, sometimes only a meter or two high. What do these variations in height tell us? Well, the towering height of the great enclosure's outer wall is an obvious statement. It speaks of prestige, power, and a desire for privacy and exclusivity for those within. It's designed to awe the outsider and protect the inhabitant, both physically and symbolically. Such height would also have controlled sight lines, carefully managing who could see what, and from where. Imagine approaching the city for the first time. That massive, unbroken curtain of stone would have been an unambiguous declaration of the importance of what lay within. Conversely, lower walls might have served different functions. They could demarcate different functional areas within a larger enclosure, separating residential zones from craft-working areas, or public spaces from more private ones. A low wall can define a boundary without necessarily creating a visual barrier or a defensive impediment. It's a subtle way of organizing space, guiding movement, and creating a sense of order. Think of them as the ancient equivalent of room dividers or garden fences, but built with considerably more permanence and a lot more rock. Then there's the thickness. Just as heights vary, So does the girth of these stone structures. The outer wall of the great enclosure isn't just tall, it's incredibly broad at its base, as we've noted, up to 5 or 6 meters. This immense thickness serves several purposes. Firstly, structural stability. A wall that high, built without mortar, needs a substantial base to support its own weight and resist any lateral forces. Remember the concept of batter, that slight inward slope. It's particularly crucial for these thicker, taller walls, ensuring they remain stable for centuries. Some of these walls are so incredibly thick, you could genuinely lose a small child or a moderately sized pet in them if there were any cavities, which, of course, there generally aren't. Not recommended as a hiding spot. Obviously. The search party, even in the 14th century, would have been quite put out. But thickness isn't just about engineering. Like height, it's also a statement, the sheer volume of stone, the immense labor required to quarry, transport, and place it, all contribute to an aura of power and wealth. Building a thicker wall than strictly necessary from a purely structural standpoint could be a way of displaying resources, of saying, look what we can command, look at the manpower we can mobilize. It's conspicuous consumption, written in granite. In contrast, internal walls, or walls enclosing less critical areas, are often thinner. They still use the same masterful dry stone technique, but they don't require the same massive footprint as the great perimeter walls. Why is one wall so much more robust and, frankly, beefier than its neighbor just a few meters away? Perhaps it was guarding more important secrets, enclosing a space of higher status, or maybe it was just an earlier construction phase before they decided to go for the super size me option on later projects. Or perhaps, just perhaps, that particular section of wall simply ate more of its stone whey protein during its formative years. You see these variations playing out across the different zones of Great Zimbabwe. The hill complex, for instance, which is perched dramatically atop a steep granite kopje, presents a fascinating interplay of natural rock formations and constructed walls. Here, the builders ingeniously incorporated massive natural boulders into their defensive and enclosing lines. The walls flow around and between these geological giants, sometimes thin where the natural rock provides the bulk of the barrier, sometimes thicker and higher where there are gaps to be filled or specific vantage points to be created. Building on such a steep, uneven, and rocky hill must have been an immense challenge. No problem, the ancient engineer probably declared with a confident wave of the hand. We'll just incorporate that 50-ton, inconveniently located boulder right into the design. It saves on quarrying, gives it a rustic charm. And let's be honest, it's not like it's going anywhere. The valley ruins, sprawling between the hill complex and the great enclosure, contain a multitude of enclosures of varying sizes, defined by walls that are generally less monumental than the great enclosure's outer perimeter, but still incredibly substantial and skillfully built. These are thought to represent the residential areas of a broader segment of the city's population, perhaps officials, merchants, or craftspeople. The walls here would have provided privacy, defined family compounds, and organized the bustling life of the city, but without necessarily needing the same overwhelming scale as the primary royal and ceremonial structures. So were all these variations, the thick, the thin, the high, the low, part of a meticulous master plan, conceived from day one? Or did they evolve more organically, responding to changing needs, available resources, the specific challenges of the terrain, or even the whims of different rulers over the centuries? The answer is likely a bit of both. Certain core structures, like the Great Enclosure, feel very much like grand, planned designs, but the overall layout of a city that thrived for several hundred years would inevitably have seen periods of expansion, modification, and rebuilding. This very variability has, naturally, led to some imaginative speculation. It's perhaps not surprising that some quirky or fringe tidbits of speculation have proposed that the varying heights and thicknesses were not just functional or symbolic in a general sense, but part of a complex coded system, or even a kind of map, with specific dimensions holding secret meanings or aligning with forgotten constellations. Imagine if the whole city was a giant, three-dimensional Sudoku puzzle carved in stone, and we just haven't found the instruction manual or the key to its stony cipher. If Wall A is precisely 5.2 meters thick, and Wall B curves at an angle of 17.3 degrees, then the chief's favorite meal was roasted guinea fowl with a side of wild spinach. It's obvious when you think about it. While there's no scientific evidence to support such elaborate interpretations, it highlights our human desire to find intricate patterns and hidden messages in such monumental and mysterious creations. More grounded in archaeological analysis, archaeologists continue to analyze whether the specific placement of the thickest and highest walls primarily served defensive, symbolic, or social segregational purposes, or a fluid combination thereof across different parts of the site and throughout its long history. For instance, was a particularly thick wall in a certain location primarily to deter attackers, to impress visitors with the ruler's power, or to physically separate different social classes or lineage groups within the city? The answer is rarely simple and often involves multiple overlapping factors. The experts are all beautifully aligned on the fundamental fact that the walls vary significantly. What those variations precisely signify in every instance is where the truly fascinating academic rock-climbing competition, or perhaps a very polite, peer-reviewed debate, really begins. These deliberate variations in wall dimensions are a crucial part of Great Zimbabwe's architectural language. They demonstrate a sophisticated understanding of structural engineering, a keen eye for aesthetic effect, and a complex system of social and spatial organization. The builders weren't just creating barriers. They were sculpting their environment, encoding social hierarchies, and making powerful statements in stone. Each change in height, each increase or decrease in thickness, adds another layer to the story, another nuance to the silent conversation these ancient walls are having with us across the centuries. It's this complexity, this refusal to be simple or monolithic, that makes Great Zimbabwe endlessly fascinating. It is indeed this complexity, this refusal of Great Zimbabwe's walls to be simple or monolithic, that keeps us endlessly fascinated. And as you continue to let your gaze wander over these varied stone surfaces, noticing the subtle shifts in height and the powerful assertions of thickness, you might begin to detect another layer of their silent conversation, a more deliberate, almost artistic whisper. Because not all these ancient walls are plain, unadorned expanses of granite. Some sections, particularly the most prominent and important ones, are embellished with intricate decorative patterns, carefully crafted from the very stones that form the wall itself. These are the patterns whispering their stories, adding yet another dimension to the architectural genius of Great Zimbabwe. These embellishments aren't painted on, nor are they carved in relief in the way you might see on a Greek temple or an Egyptian tomb. Instead, they are an integral part of the dry stone construction, achieved by the skillful selection and placement of individual stones of different shades, or by setting stones at contrasting angles. It's a subtle art, but incredibly effective, breaking up the vastness of the stone expanses and adding a distinct visual rhythm. It's as if the builders, having mastered the engineering of these colossal structures, then decided to sign their work with a flourish of understated artistry. Right, team. You can almost hear the master mason proclaiming, "Today, we're not just stacking for stability and impressiveness. We're embellishing for posterity. Make those V-shapes sharp and consistent." People, this isn't amateur hour zigzag construction. This is legacy work. You'll find these decorative friezes most notably on the upper sections of the imposing outer wall of the great enclosure, the very place where they would be most visible, catching the light and drawing the eye from afar. The original conical tower, too, as we briefly touched upon, is believed to have been crowned with a similar decorative band. You might also spot them on certain walls within the hill complex, often demarcating significant areas or entrances. The most famous and recognizable of these motifs is the chevron pattern. Imagine a continuous band of V-shapes, or inverted V-shapes, running horizontally along the wall for tens, sometimes even hundreds of feet. These are created by carefully tilting stones, or selecting triangularish pieces to form the distinctive zigzag line. It's a striking design, both simple and dynamic, and its repetition creates a powerful visual effect. Decorative patterns, notably the chevron motif, are a distinctive feature of some of Great Zimbabwe's walls, particularly on the Great Enclosure, and are widely believed to hold significant symbolic meaning. Alongside the chevron, you might also discern other patterns. There's the herringbone, where stones are laid in short, slanting parallel lines, with adjacent rows slanting in the opposite direction, creating a kind of woven or fishbone effect. Then there's dentelle, which features small, tooth-like projections, like a row of miniature battlements, though far too small to be defensive, and often these patterned bands are delineated by chord patterns, which are single lines of carefully selected stones, perhaps of a contrasting color or laid with particular neatness, acting like a frame for the main design. The skill required to integrate these patterns seamlessly into the already complex dry stone fabric of the walls is immense. It's another level of precision, another testament to the builder's mastery over their material. But what do these patterns mean? This is where the whispering stories truly begin, and where interpretation becomes a fascinating blend of archaeological evidence, ethnographic analogy, and informed speculation, trying to definitively nail down the precise, unambiguous meaning of each pattern is like trying to translate an ancient dialect of emoji without the original key. Is that V-shape a sign of royalty, a symbol of water, or does it simply mean this is a very important and rather nicely decorated wall right here? The chevron motif, being the most prominent, has attracted the most scholarly attention. Many interpretations link it to symbols of royalty and leadership among Shona-speaking peoples. The pattern bears a resemblance to the scales of a crocodile, an animal of great symbolic importance, often associated with chieftainship, power, and the ability to mediate between the spiritual and physical worlds. So, a band of chevrons might have been a clear visual statement. This place belongs to the ruler, the one with the power of the crocodile. Another strong line of interpretation connects the chevron to water symbolism. The zigzag lines are reminiscent of flowing water, or perhaps lightning, both vital for agricultural societies in a sometimes arid environment. Water means life, fertility, and sustenance. Given the importance of agriculture to the prosperity of Great Zimbabwe, such symbolism would have been deeply resonant. It could also be linked to snakes, which in many southern African cultures are associated with water spirits, ancestors, and spiritual power. It's also possible that the chevron and other patterns represented lineage or kinship, a kind of family crest or clan identifier written large in stone. Different patterns, or variations in their execution, might have signified different social groups or sections of the ruling elite. The walls, in this sense, would not only define physical space, but also map out the social landscape of the city. The placement of these patterns is also significant. As mentioned, they often appear on the upper portions of the most important walls, such as the great enclosure's outer perimeter. This ensured maximum visibility, acting as a public declaration of the status and symbolic associations of the space within. It wasn't just for the benefit of those inside, but also for anyone approaching or viewing the structure from a distance. Imagine the extra effort involved in this decorative work. Okay, team, this entire upper section, for the next 200 meters, gets the fancy chevron treatment. It's going to take twice as long, require a lot more careful stone selection, and probably a good deal more squinting to get it all perfectly aligned. But just think of the Instagram likes in, about 700 years. An anachronistic thought, of course, but the desire to create something impressive and lasting was clearly there, naturally. Just as with the purpose of the conical tower, or the identity of the builders themselves, the patterns attracted some rather imaginative interpretations from early European observers. Before the indigenous Shona origins and rich local symbolism were properly understood and acknowledged. Some Romantic or colonial-era notions attempted to link these geometric patterns to Phoenician scripts, Sabaean symbols, or other exotic, non-African influences. Ah, yes. You can almost hear a Victorian antiquarian musing, adjusting his spectacles. This intricate chevron design. It must undoubtedly be ancient Phoenician for "please wipe your feet before entering the royal enclosure." Or perhaps a coded message from the Queen of Sheba herself. Bless their cotton socks and their often culturally blinkered enthusiasm. They tried. Modern archaeology, thankfully, has firmly rooted the understanding of these patterns within the rich tapestry of indigenous Southern African artistry and symbolism. The debate about precise meanings, however, continues in a more nuanced and informed way. The precise symbolic meanings of the various stone patterns, particularly the ubiquitous chevron, are still subject to interpretation, with scholars considering links to royalty, water symbolism, lineage, social identity, or even astronomical observations, though a single, universally accepted consensus remains elusive for every detail. It's like a magnificent, ancient Rorschach test. But instead of ink blots, you have these incredibly large and laboriously constructed stone motifs. Different experts, looking at the same evidence through the lenses of archaeology, art history, anthropology, and oral traditions, might emphasize different layers of meaning. And that's perfectly fine. It keeps the discussion vibrant and acknowledges the likely multi-layered nature of symbolism in any complex society. The academics generally agree that the patterns are incredibly cool and significant. What they're precisely saying in every instance is where the delightful scholarly detective work really begins. What is undeniable is the artistry involved. These patterns elevate the walls from mere functional structures to works of monumental art. They demonstrate a sophisticated aesthetic sensibility, a desire not just to build big, but to build beautifully. They add texture, visual interest, and a layer of symbolic richness that continues to speak to us today. Even if we don't fully understand every word of their stony language, they are a reminder that the people of Great Zimbabwe were not just pragmatic engineers, but also artists, imbuing their most important creations with beauty and meaning. These patterns are the whispers of their worldview, their beliefs, and their identity, carefully woven into the very fabric of their extraordinary city. And as you trace these ancient designs with your eyes, you're connecting with a tradition of artistry that is both profoundly African and universally human. And as you trace those ancient, decorative designs with your eyes, connecting with that tradition of artistry, your thoughts might naturally turn to how one would have moved through this extraordinary city of stone. These walls, whether plain or patterned, thick or thin, high or low, weren't just static barriers. They were dynamic elements that shaped and directed the flow of life, of ceremony, of power. The very way you enter and navigate these spaces is a carefully orchestrated experience, managed through a network of designed entrances and pathways, each with its own story to tell about control, access, and perhaps even defense. So, let's imagine ourselves approaching one of these enclosures again, perhaps one of the many in the valley ruins, or even the imposing great enclosure itself. You won't find grand, triumphal arches or wide, welcoming gates flanked by statues. Instead, many entrances into the enclosures at Great Zimbabwe are deliberately narrow, and the pathways often winding, suggesting a concern for controlling movement and enhancing security, or creating specific processional experiences. These aren't accidental squeezes. They are intentional architectural choices. The openings are often just wide enough for one or two people to pass through comfortably at a time, compelling a more orderly, perhaps more deferential, mode of entry. Some entrances are even slightly obscured, not immediately obvious as you approach the wall, requiring a degree of local knowledge or guidance to find. You don't just barge in, you are guided, channeled. There's often a distinct lack of formal, still surviving gate structures, like the heavy wooden doors or iron portcullises you might associate with medieval European castles. While it's possible that wooden doors or barriers existed and have long since rotted away, wood doesn't last for centuries in this climate without specific preservation. The primary control seems to have been built into the stone fabric itself, You might find carefully constructed stone lintels over some entrances, or thresholds worn smooth by the passage of countless feet. But the emphasis is on the narrowness and strategic placement of the opening within the massive wall. Once you pass through one of these constricted entry points, you don't typically find yourself in a vast, open courtyard where everything is immediately visible. Instead, you often enter another carefully defined space, perhaps a narrow passage that winds between two high walls. The most famous example, as we've touched upon, is the parallel passage within the great enclosure, a long, confined corridor running between the main outer wall and an earlier inner wall. Walking through such a space is an experience in itself. The walls tower on either side, limiting your peripheral vision, focusing your attention forward. The light can be dimmer here, the sounds more contained, your own footsteps echoing softly. It creates a sense of progression, of moving deeper into a controlled environment. Some of these passages are so very narrow, you'd practically have to turn sideways if you'd indulged in a particularly hearty pre-ceremonial feast. Excuse me, pardon me. Just a slightly overindulged dignitary and his surprisingly slim retinue attempting to navigate this architecturally challenging thoroughfare. This network of passages isn't just a quaint design feature. It's a highly effective way of managing movement and segregating space. It means that even once you are inside an enclosure, your access to different parts of it can still be carefully controlled. You can't just wander freely. Your route is determined by the layout of these internal pathways, leading you from one specific area to another, perhaps revealing new spaces or important features only gradually. It's like an ancient, open-air version of IKEA, but instead of cunningly designed pathways leading you inexorably towards affordable Swedish furniture and dubious meatballs, here you're being guided through zones of differing social or ritual importance, ending up not at a checkout, but perhaps at another stone wall, a chieftain's residence, or a sacred ceremonial spot. And if you've forgotten your map, or there isn't one, well, good luck finding the exit before nightfall. This controlled access has profound implications for understanding the social structure of Great Zimbabwe. It strongly suggests a hierarchical society, where access to certain areas, particularly those associated with the ruling elite or religious rituals, was restricted. Not everyone would have been permitted to venture into the innermost sanctums of the hill complex, or the more private residential areas within the great enclosure. The architecture itself would have reinforced these social distinctions, making it physically clear who belonged where and who did not. This was the original gated community, but executed with infinitely more style, significantly better stonework, and probably fewer passive-aggressive notes about whose turn it was to sweep the communal Daga courtyard. Now, what about defense? Great Zimbabwe doesn't scream fortress in the way a heavily crenellated castle with moats and drawbridges might. There are no obvious battlements for archers to stand upon, no arrow slits built into the walls in the European or Middle Eastern tradition. Yet, it would be a mistake to assume these structures had no defensive considerations. The very features we've been discussing, the high, thick walls, the narrow, controlled entrances, and the winding passages, would have offered significant defensive advantages. Imagine trying to attack such a place. A large, disorganized attacking force would find it incredibly difficult to breach those massive outer walls. Even if they found an entrance, its narrowness would create a bottleneck, forcing them to enter slowly, in small numbers, making them highly vulnerable to defenders positioned within. Those winding, high-walled passages would be disorienting to an outsider and would further break up any attacking force, preventing them from moving swiftly or cohesively through the complex. It's not exactly Fort Knox, but you try storming this place with a large, unruly mob. You'd get stuck in the first narrow passage, like a particularly disgruntled cork in a very unyielding stone bottle. Okay, lads. New plan, we attack in single file, very politely, and for goodness sake, no one trip over their own spear. The layout naturally channels intruders into controllable spaces, making them easier to isolate and deal with. The hill complex, with its commanding position atop a steep granite kopje, and its clever integration of natural boulders with constructed walls, is often seen as the most overtly defensive part of Great Zimbabwe. Its passages are particularly labyrinthine, its entrances strategically placed to take advantage of the difficult terrain. It's easy to see how a relatively small number of defenders could hold such a position against a much larger force unfamiliar with its intricacies. This brings us to a somewhat quirky or fringe tidbit from the annals of early interpretation. Some of the more romantic and excitable early visitors, perhaps influenced by tales of classical antiquity, saw these intricate pathways, especially on the hill complex, as deliberately designed labyrinths or inescapable traps intended to confuse and ensnare enemies, almost like a mythical minotaur's lair built of granite. While the passages certainly would have been confusing to an uninvited guest with hostile intent, their primary purpose was likely more about controlled access, segregation of space for social and ritual reasons, and a more practical form of defense rather than elaborate, mythical man-traps. Still, one can imagine an ancient storyteller embellishing tales of how invaders got hopelessly lost in the stone maze, eventually surrendering out of sheer frustration and a desperate need for directions to the nearest exit, a minotaur's lair. Perhaps if the minotaur was particularly fond of well-constructed dry stone architecture, had a peculiar penchant for strategically narrow corridors, and, had somehow migrated to southern Africa and developed a taste for granite. The ongoing discussion, however, is more nuanced. The extent to which the narrow passages and controlled entrances were primarily designed for defensive purposes versus their role in ceremonial processions or reinforcing social hierarchies by limiting access remains a key area of discussion among archaeologists. Were these features a military first design, with social and ritual functions as a secondary benefit? Or was it the other way around? Were they primarily about creating sacred, exclusive spaces and processional ways, with the defensive advantages being a welcome byproduct? Or, most likely, was it a sophisticated blend of all these considerations? The beauty of Great Zimbabwe's architecture is that it could serve multiple purposes simultaneously. A narrow, high-walled passage could be both a dramatic route for a religious procession and a difficult spot for an enemy to fight their way through. Imagine trying to get directions within this sprawling city of stone during its heyday. Excuse me, revered elder, could you possibly point me towards the main ceremonial plaza where the sacred eagles are kept? Ah, certainly. Young traveler, you proceed through that almost invisible gap in the wall over yonder. Take a sharp left at the enormously curvy wall, then a right at the slightly less enormously curvy wall that has the delightful chevron pattern. Continue along the passage that makes you feel a bit like you're in a stone sandwich. And if you reach a very solid, very tall cone of stone, you've gone a tad too far and will need to retrace your steps. Can't miss it. Or, actually, you very much can. The entrances and pathways of Great Zimbabwe are far more than just ways to get from A to B. They are integral to its power, its social fabric, and its defense. They speak of a society that understood how to use architecture to shape experience, to assert authority, and to protect its vital interests. Each turn, each constriction, each carefully revealed vista was part of a deliberate design, another layer of the sophisticated urban planning that makes this ancient city so compelling. Indeed, each turn, each constriction, each carefully revealed vista within Great Zimbabwe speaks volumes about a society that masterfully used architecture to shape experience, assert authority, and safeguard its interests. And as we consider how these designed spaces might have guided movement and sight, it's intriguing to ponder another, often overlooked, sensory dimension: sound. Could it be that these stones, so solid and silent now, were once part of an environment where sound itself was carefully considered, perhaps even engineered? Let's lean in a little closer, metaphorically speaking, and listen for the stones that almost speak, exploring any potential acoustic engineering or sound-related features within these ancient enclosures. The idea that ancient peoples sometimes incorporated acoustic considerations into their architecture, a field now often explored under the banner of archaeoacoustics, isn't entirely new. Sound, after all, is a powerful medium. It can be used for communication over distances, for creating specific moods during ceremonies, for enhancing the perceived power of a speaker, or for fostering a sense of communal experience. In a world without electronic amplification, understanding and utilizing the natural acoustic properties of a space would have been a significant advantage. So, what about Great Zimbabwe? As you wander through its stone-walled enclosures and navigate its narrow, often towering passages, you can't help but notice how different sounds behave. While not definitively proven as intentionally designed for acoustics in every instance, the enclosed stone structures and narrow passages at Great Zimbabwe would have naturally created distinct sound environments, with echoes and sound amplification effects in certain areas. Imagine standing within the great enclosure, surrounded by that massive curving wall. A voice, a shout, the clap of hands. How would it resonate? The hard, unforgiving surfaces of the granite would certainly reflect sound waves, potentially creating noticeable reverberation or distinct echoes. You could try a little experiment in your mind. You cough discreetly in one of these narrow, high-walled passages, and the echo comes back a few seconds later, perhaps sounding suspiciously like a gentle admonishment from an ancient spirit. Ahem, cover your mouth. Mortal, you're in the presence of greatness, or at least very large rocks. In some of the more confined spaces, like the parallel passage, or within smaller, fully enclosed areas, even a spoken word might be amplified, carrying further or sounding more resonant than it would in an open field. This could have been particularly significant for ceremonial purposes. Imagine a ritual leader, a king, or an orator addressing an assembly, if they were positioned in an acoustically favorable spot. Their voice, even unamplified by modern means, could have carried with clear authority throughout the intended audience area. It would have been the original public address system, powered entirely by clever architecture and a healthy dose of gravitas. No need for a microphone and speakers when the walls themselves can help your voice boom with royal pronouncements or sacred incantations. Conversely, these same stone structures could have been effective at isolating sound, creating zones of quiet and privacy. Those thick, solid walls we discussed earlier. They wouldn't just keep people out. They'd keep sounds out too, or at least muffle them significantly. This could have been crucial for the elite residing within the great enclosure, allowing for private conversations and a degree of seclusion from the general hubbub of a city that may have housed up to 18,000 people, on the plus side for any ancient inhabitants wanting a bit of peace and quiet. Those thick walls were probably fantastic for soundproofing. No, I absolutely did not hear you calling me to help with the grinding of the millet. My dearest, must have been the wind whistling through the exceptionally solid and sound-dampening granite. Consider the very entrances and narrow passages. While we've focused on their role in controlling movement and defense, they would also have shaped the auditory experience of approaching or entering a significant space. Moving from a relatively open area into a constricted passage would change the soundscape dramatically. Outside, noises would diminish, while sounds generated within the passage footsteps. Voices might become more pronounced, more intimate. This could heighten anticipation or create a sense of transition into a special or sacred zone. In some of these incredibly tight spots, even a whisper could probably travel quite effectively along the stone surfaces, allowing for discreet communication. The original game of pass it on, but with potentially sensitive royal decrees or vital priestly instructions instead of easily garbled schoolyard gossip. The conical tower itself. Could it have had unique acoustic properties? Given its solid nature, it's unlikely to have acted as a resonance chamber in the way a hollow structure might. However, its very presence, its shape, and the materials used could have affected how sound moved around it or reflected off it within the great enclosure. Some have speculated that a speaker standing near its base might have experienced some vocal reinforcement, but this is highly speculative and would require careful modern testing to even begin to assess. Now, the crucial question, were these acoustic effects intentional design choices, or simply happy accidents, the natural byproduct of building large structures with hard, reflective stone? This is where things get tricky in the world of archaeoacoustics. Proving intent is notoriously difficult. It's not like the builders of Great Zimbabwe left behind architectural blueprints with little notes saying, ensure a reverberation time of at least 5 seconds in this ceremonial area, or user reviews proclaiming, 5 stars, excellent reverb in the royal enclosure, perfect for dramatic pronouncements, and making even mundane announcements sound incredibly important. However, the lack of definitive proof of intent doesn't mean the ancient inhabitants were unaware of these effects. People who live intimately within an environment, especially one they have constructed themselves over generations, develop a keen understanding of its properties, including its soundscape. It's plausible that they observed how sound behaved in different parts of their city and utilized those natural acoustic advantages. even if they didn't initially design them with acoustics as the primary driver. For instance, if a particular spot was found to amplify a speaker's voice naturally, it might well have been chosen as the preferred location for addresses or ceremonies. This brings us to some of the more imaginative and often less scientifically grounded ideas. As a rather quirky or fringe tidbit, some highly speculative theories have proposed that certain individual stones within the walls were tuned like musical instruments, or that the entire site was laid out to act as a giant sound resonator for complex esoteric or even psychoactive purposes. These ideas, while creatively intriguing and perfect for a late-night documentary with dramatic music, currently lack any credible archaeological or scientific backing. The idea of ancient builders carefully tapping and tuning multi-ton granite boulders to achieve specific resonant frequencies, like assembling a colossal prehistoric xylophone, is a fun thought. Right. Just gently tap that D-sharp monolith over there if you want to summon the rain god. But for goodness sake, don't hit the C-flat. That summons the tax collector. But it remains firmly in the realm of fantasy. The more grounded, scholarly inquiry continues. Researchers are still exploring the possibility that some architectural features at Great Zimbabwe were intentionally designed to manipulate sound for ceremonial or communicative purposes, though distinguishing deliberate acoustic engineering from incidental effects remains challenging without more direct evidence or clear ethnographic parallels directly linking specific building practices to acoustic outcomes. It involves meticulous on-site acoustic measurements, careful analysis of architectural forms, and comparisons with how sound is used in the traditional cultures of the region today, hoping to find echoes of past practices, even if we can't definitively prove that every echo or every quiet zone was a pre-planned masterpiece of acoustic engineering. Simply considering the soundscape of Great Zimbabwe adds a rich, almost tangible layer to our understanding of what it might have been like to live there. Close your eyes for a moment and try to imagine it, the murmur of voices, the rhythmic clang of a blacksmith's hammer perhaps drifting from a distant working area, the calls of children, the sounds of livestock, all contained, reflected, and shaped by these immense stone walls. The wind itself would have sung different tunes as it passed over variously shaped walls or through narrow openings. These stones, in their mass and their placement, wouldn't just have shaped sightlines and pathways. They would have curated the very soundtrack of daily life and sacred ritual. They may not speak in words we can easily decipher, but they certainly would have given voice to the city in other, more subtle, resonant ways. These stones, in their mass and placement, certainly would have given a unique voice to the city, shaping its sounds and the auditory experiences of its inhabitants. But now, let's turn our attention from the voice of the city to the voices, or rather, the hands and minds of the people who brought this monumental vision into being. For too long, the question of who built Great Zimbabwe was shrouded in unnecessary mystery and, frankly, some rather prejudiced speculation. But the archaeological and historical consensus today is clear and resounding. It's time to learn about the hands of the builders, the skilled artisans, and the organized society that constructed this marvel, the ancestors of the Shona people. So, who were these architectural maestros, these granite gurus who could coax such enduring elegance from unforgiving stone, not visiting aliens with advanced levitation technology, not wandering Phoenicians on a very extended Mediterranean holiday, not a lost tribe of, well, anyone else you might have heard mentioned in those older, more fanciful tales. Drum roll, please. The credit goes squarely to the local talent. Archaeological and historical evidence overwhelmingly attributes the construction of Great Zimbabwe to the ancestors of the modern Shona people, who inhabited the Zimbabwean plateau and surrounding regions for centuries, developing a sophisticated state-level society that reached its zenith between the 11th and 15th centuries CE. This isn't just a hopeful guess. It's backed by a wealth of evidence, from the types of pottery and iron tools found at the site, which are characteristic of Shona material culture, to settlement patterns and oral traditions that link modern Shona communities to this ancient capital. Understanding this is crucial, because for many years, particularly during the colonial era, the sheer scale and sophistication of Great Zimbabwe led many European observers to believe it couldn't possibly have been built by indigenous Africans. They proposed all sorts of exotic origins, a testament more to their own biases than to the actual evidence. This brings us to a rather quirky, or perhaps more accurately, a cringeworthy tidbit from the history of the site's interpretation. Some early researchers, so convinced that local people couldn't have been responsible, even went so far as to meticulously measure human skulls found in and around Great Zimbabwe, hoping to find proof of non-African or more civilized racial traits among the ruling class. Thankfully, such pseudoscientific and racially motivated approaches have long been discredited, and archaeology has moved on to more evidence-based and respectful methods of understanding the past. It's a stark reminder of how easily prejudice can obscure the truth, and why it's so important to let the evidence, rather than preconceived notions, guide our understanding. Science, always evolving, and hopefully learning from its past missteps. So, what do we know about these Shona ancestors who lived, worked, and ruled here? They weren't a primitive, isolated tribe. Far from it. By the time Great Zimbabwe was flourishing, they had established a complex hierarchical society. At the top would have been a king or paramount chief, a ruler who likely combined political and religious authority. Beneath him, there would have been a hierarchy of nobles, officials, ritual specialists, and military leaders, forming the elite who probably resided within the more impressive stone enclosures, like the Great Enclosure itself. Then there were the commoners, farmers, herders, artisans, and traders, who supported this ruling class and formed the backbone of the economy. Presumably, there was a king, or a very persuasive royal committee, who at some point declared, "I have a vision. It involves an unprecedented quantity of stone, a lot of very artistic stacking, and you, my loyal subjects, all appear to have remarkably strong backs and a great deal of patience. Democracy in action, or perhaps just really effective top-down delegation with a healthy dose of divine right. The economy that supported such a large population and such monumental building projects was diverse. Cattle herding was central, as it still is in many Shona communities. Cattle represented wealth, status, and were important for social transactions. Agriculture also thrived, with crops like sorghum and millet being staples. cultivated in the surrounding fertile lands. But Great Zimbabwe was also a major commercial hub. Remember those glass beads from India and porcelain from China. We mentioned earlier, the people of Great Zimbabwe controlled lucrative trade routes, dealing in gold, which was mined in the region, and ivory, in exchange for these exotic imported goods. This trade brought considerable wealth and prestige to the rulers, funding their ambitious building programs and allowing for a class of specialized artisans. These folks weren't just good with rocks, though they were clearly exceptional at that. They were skilled metallurgists, working with iron to create tools and weapons, and with gold to craft beautiful jewelry and ornaments that have been found at the site. Their potters produced distinctive ceramics, and their farmers understood the land and its seasons. They were the original multitaskers, farming, herding, smithing, trading, and in their spare time, casually erecting one of Africa's most significant and enduring ancient monuments. No big deal. Just another Tuesday at the office, or rather, at the quarry and construction site. Now, who were the actual hands-on stonemasons? The individuals who physically quarried, shaped, and laid these millions of granite blocks? Were they a specialized guild of highly trained artisans, or was it a more general workforce mobilized by the state for large-scale projects? The answer is probably a combination. The consistency of skill and the distinct stylistic features suggest the presence of master builders and experienced masons who understood the complex techniques of dry stone construction and passed this knowledge down through generations, perhaps through apprenticeships. The sheer scale of the undertaking, however, would have also required a vast labor force for quarrying, transporting stone, and providing general assistance. The precise nature of this labor organization, whether it was primarily coerced, perhaps a form of corvée labor where subjects owed a certain amount of work to the ruler, or a more voluntary system driven by loyalty, religious duty, or even payment in kind like food, cattle, or prestige goods, is still actively discussed by historians and archaeologists. There are no surviving pay stubs or employment contracts. Unfortunately, what is clear is that it required incredible coordination and management to feed, house, even if temporarily, and direct such large numbers of people over the many decades, even centuries, that Great Zimbabwe was under construction and expansion. The Employee of the Month award probably involved an extra gourd of refreshing sorghum beer, a slightly less heavy set of rocks to carry for the following week, and undisputed bragging rights at the local quarry's end-of-day social gathering. Imagine the daily life of one of these builders. Rising early, a long walk to the quarry or the current building site. Hours spent under the African sun, engaged in physically demanding work, levering massive stones, chipping away at granite, carefully fitting blocks into place. There would have been the camaraderie of working together on a shared project, the guidance of experienced foremen, the satisfaction of seeing these immense walls rise under their hands, and then, in the evenings, returning to their own homes, perhaps simpler daga huts located in the surrounding valleys, to their families, their communities, their own farms and herds. They didn't leave behind detailed written blueprints or a making of Great Zimbabwe documentary series for us to binge-watch. Their names are lost to time, but their skill, their dedication, and their societal vision are immortalized in every perfectly placed stone every sweeping curve of the walls, every enigmatic pattern. They are the silent authors of this stone epic. By recognizing the Shona people as the creators of Great Zimbabwe, we don't just correct historical inaccuracies. We celebrate a remarkable chapter in human ingenuity and cultural achievement, a testament to the sophisticated societies that flourished in Africa long before European arrival. Their hands may have long since turned to dust, but their legacy stands firm, inviting us to listen to the stories the stones still tell of their creators, their hands. The hands of Shona ancestors may have long since turned to dust, but their monumental legacy in stone stands firm, inviting us, compelling us to listen to the stories these structures still tell of their creators. And one of the most astonishing of those stories is how they managed it. How did they lift these massive quantities of stone, some blocks weighing several tons, to create walls soaring up to 11 meters high, all without the benefit of modern machinery? How did they raise not just stones, but history itself, with little more than their own ingenuity, muscle, and an extraordinary level of organization? Let's delve into the theories and try to visualize this incredible feat of ancient engineering. First, let's just re-emphasize the sheer scale of the challenge. We're not talking about building a garden wall here. We're talking about quarrying, transporting, and then precisely placing millions of granite blocks, some of them substantial, to create vast, towering edifices. And all this was achieved without cranes, without hydraulic lifts, without powered winches, and, as we've noted, without wheeled vehicles for transporting those heavy loads over significant distances or up steep inclines. It's a scenario that makes your average DIY flat-pack furniture assembly look like a walk in the park. This wasn't a job for the faint of heart, or, indeed, for the weak of bicep. The ancient project manager's daily pep talk probably included something along the lines of, "Right, team? On the count of 3. Lift and please, for the love of all that is sacred. Try not to drop this multi-ton piece of our glorious heritage on your foot. Our ancestral health care plan is somewhat limited in scope when it comes to crushed metatarsals. So, how did they do it? While the stones themselves don't explicitly tell us how they were lifted, archaeologists and engineers have proposed several plausible methods, likely used in combination. One of the most commonly suggested techniques is the use of ramps. Imagine large earthen or timber ramps built up against the side of the wall as it grew higher. Stones could then be dragged or levered up these inclines to the required height. Once a section of the wall was completed, the ramp would either be dismantled and rebuilt elsewhere, or perhaps the earth from it would be incorporated into other parts of the site. Building a giant stone wall often meant Step 1 was effectively build a giant dirt hill next to it. Step 2, once the wall section was complete, would be to painstakingly remove said giant dirt hill. Simple-ish. The main challenge with this theory is that direct archaeological evidence for such massive, temporary ramps is often scarce, as they would have been removed or would have eroded over time. Another crucial tool in their arsenal would have been leverage. The simple power of the lever, a long, strong pole of timber, perhaps, can be used to lift and maneuver surprisingly heavy objects with a relatively small amount of applied force. By strategically placing fulcrums, perhaps smaller stones or wooden blocks, and applying effort to the long end of the lever, workers could have nudged, tilted, and precisely positioned stones onto the wall. For the higher courses, this would have been an indispensable technique, allowing them to make those final, crucial adjustments to ensure a snug fit. What about scaffolding? It's highly probable that timber scaffolding was used, especially for the higher sections of the walls and for any decorative work. This would have provided a stable platform for workers to stand on and to help guide stones into place. Like the ramps, direct evidence of wooden scaffolding is rare due to decay over centuries. However, the sheer quality and precision of the stonework, even at considerable heights, strongly suggest that the builders had a secure and accessible way to work. They weren't just chucking stones upwards and hoping for the best. And, of course, we cannot underestimate the role of sheer, well-organized human muscle power. While some blocks were undoubtedly too large for individuals to lift, many of the stones used are of a size that could be handled by one or two strong people, or lifted by teams working in unison. Imagine coordinated groups of workers, perhaps chanting or singing to keep rhythm and ensure collective effort, lifting and passing stones up to the masons working on the wall face. This would have been particularly relevant for the vast quantities of smaller blocks used to fill the core of the thicker walls, or for the more regular courses of facing stones. It's likely that the builders employed a course-by-course construction method, working their way upwards. The completed lower sections of the wall would themselves have provided a platform to work from, allowing them to build the next layer. They would have built from both the inside and outside faces, especially for the thicker walls, filling the central core as they went. This systematic approach, layer upon layer, would have allowed for careful checking of alignment and stability as the structure rose. The organization of labor, which we touched upon when discussing the builders themselves, would have been absolutely paramount for these lifting and placement operations. You would have needed specialized teams, some for quarrying, some for the arduous task of transport, others skilled in the heavy lifting and leverage, and finally, the master masons responsible for the precise final placement and fitting of each stone. Clear communication, coordination, and a shared understanding of the building plan would have been essential. Today, we'd probably use a fleet of heavy machinery, laser levels, and computer-aided design, and likely have it done in a fraction of the time, with an obligatory coffee and donut break every hour. They achieved it with grit, sweat, an incredible understanding of basic physics, and presumably a lot of very effective teamwork-based chanting. Have there been attempts to replicate these ancient construction techniques through experimental archaeology? Such experiments can be incredibly valuable for understanding the practical challenges and potential solutions. While large-scale replications of Great Zimbabwe's walls are rare due to cost and complexity, smaller-scale experiments with dry stone walling and traditional lifting methods often highlight just how effective these seemingly simple techniques can be when applied with skill and knowledge. They also underscore the immense amount of time and sustained effort required. Of course, when faced with such monumental achievements from the past, especially when the precise methods aren't immediately obvious, human imagination can sometimes run wild. This leads us to a particularly quirky or fringe tidbit, some of the more out there, early theories. Struggling to comprehend how such massive stones could be lifted without modern machinery, resorted to decidedly non-scientific explanations. These included fanciful notions of sound levitation, where stones were supposedly made weightless and floated into place through the use of specific sonic frequencies or mystical incantations, or other equally magical means. Ah, the romantic, they just hummed the giant rocks into place with a catchy spiritual tune theory. If only home renovation or major civil engineering projects were that easy today. My loft conversion would have been completed in minutes with a well-chosen Gregorian chant. These ideas, needless to say, have no basis in archaeological fact and serve only to obscure the very real, very impressive human ingenuity and hard labor that went into building Great Zimbabwe. The more grounded and scholarly discussion continues. Of course, archaeologists and engineers continue to model and debate the most probable combination of techniques, such as the specific design and angle of ramps, the types of levers used, or the nature of any timber scaffolding that would have been employed to lift the heaviest stones to the highest points of the walls, especially in structures like the Great Enclosure. They analyze the wear patterns on tools, look for subtle clues in the construction sequence of the walls themselves, and draw comparisons with traditional building methods that may have survived in other parts of the world, or even in local memory. What about safety? In an era long before hard hats, steel-toed boots, and detailed health and safety regulations, construction on this scale would have been inherently dangerous. Their risk assessment protocols probably consisted primarily of, will this extremely large and heavy piece of granite crush me to a pulp if I stand precisely here whilst my colleagues attempt to maneuver it? If the answer was yes, the sensible course of action was to move slightly to the left or right. If no, then carry on with the task at hand. Despite these dangers, the quality and longevity of their work speak to their care and skill. Lifting these stones and raising these walls was a triumph of human endeavor. It required not just brute force, but immense intelligence, planning, and a deep, practical understanding of mechanics and materials. There were no user manuals, no YouTube tutorials on how to build your own 11-meter-high dry stone imperial capital in 10 centuries or less. It was pure, unadulterated human brain power, combined with a colossal amount of communal effort and a truly remarkable can-do attitude, all resulting in a legacy that quite literally reshaped their landscape and our understanding of history. That pure, unadulterated human brain power, that colossal communal effort, and that truly remarkable can-do attitude all resulted in this breathtaking legacy in stone. But it begs the enormous question why. Why expend such almost unimaginable resources of time, labor, and skill to quarry, shape, transport, and meticulously stack millions of granite blocks? What was the driving purpose behind these grand walls, these enigmatic towers, these carefully controlled spaces? Was Great Zimbabwe primarily a mighty fortress, a luxurious royal palace, a sacred religious shrine, or perhaps something more complex, a blend of all these things? This is one of the most fundamental and fascinating debates surrounding this ancient city, a question that invites us to ponder the very heart of its existence, trying to neatly pigeonhole Great Zimbabwe into just one single category, fortress, or palace, or shrine, is a bit like trying to describe your incredibly versatile smartphone as just a device for making calls. It did, and does, so much more, honey. And it's highly likely that Great Zimbabwe, in its prime, served multiple interconnected functions, evolving over the centuries of its occupation. Let's consider the fortress angle first. There are certainly elements that suggest a concern for security and defense. The hill complex, for instance, is perched dramatically atop a high granite kopje, offering commanding views of the surrounding landscape. A classic defensive position. Its entrances are narrow and easily defended, and its passages winding, making it difficult for any unwelcome visitors to navigate. The sheer height and thickness of the main outer wall of the great enclosure would have presented a formidable barrier to any potential aggressors. Remember, those controlled access points and narrow passages we talked about. They don't just manage social flow, they make it decidedly tricky for an invading force to gain easy entry or move through the city in any organized fashion. Come at me, bro. The 11-meter high, 6-meter thick wall might have silently declared, in a very polite, very stony, and very firm sort of way. However, Great Zimbabwe lacks some of the more overt military features common to dedicated fortresses in other parts of the world from similar periods. There are no crenellations or battlements for archers to shelter behind, no obvious arrow slits, no moats or drawbridges. While undeniably strong and imposing, the primary message of the walls, especially those of the great enclosure, often feels more like one of prestige, exclusion, and the delineation of sacred or elite space, rather than purely military might. So, while defensibility was clearly a factor, and a useful byproduct of its massive construction, was it the primary driver? Perhaps not solely. What about the idea of a palace, a royal residence, and the administrative heart of a powerful state? This interpretation has a lot going for it. Great Zimbabwe is generally understood by archaeologists to have been a major political, religious, and trading center, serving as the capital of a powerful Shona state. Its functions likely included royal residence, elite settlement, and sites for important ceremonies. The sheer scale and grandeur of structures like the Great Enclosure strongly suggest they were designed for and occupied by a ruling elite. The presence of numerous Daga hut foundations within these enclosures indicates that people lived there, and the quality and quantity of imported luxury goods found, those Chinese celadon sherds, Persian faience, and glass beads from afar, point to occupants of high status with access to long-distance trade networks. This was the seat of power, the place where decisions were made, where resources were controlled, and from where the kingdom's influence radiated outwards. Imagine the royal address, number 1, the Great Enclosure, Zimbabwe. Probably had terrible and very slow postal service back then, though. Return to sender, addressee unknown. No such specific baobab tree found at these coordinates. The layout of the enclosures, with their carefully managed access in distinct zones, also supports the idea of a royal capital, where social hierarchies were clearly demarcated and maintained through architecture. The king, his family, his advisors, and religious leaders would have occupied the most prestigious and protected areas, while other officials, traders, and artisans might have lived in surrounding enclosures of slightly lesser, though still impressive, stature. Then we have the argument for Great Zimbabwe as a shrine or a major religious and ceremonial center. The evidence here is also compelling. The presence of symbolic elements like the enigmatic conical tower, the famous Zimbabwe birds' soapstone sculptures of birds, often found on pedestals, which are considered highly significant culturally and religiously. And the decorative patterns on the walls all point to a rich ritual life. The hill complex, in particular, is often interpreted as having early religious significance, perhaps serving as the spiritual nucleus of the settlement even before the grander structures in the valley were built, a kind of acropolis overlooking the city. Shona cosmology, both historically and in more recent times, places great importance on ancestors, spiritual forces, and communication with the spirit world, often through specific rituals and at sacred sites. The enclosures at Great Zimbabwe, with their high walls creating secluded and sanctified spaces, would have been ideal locations for such ceremonies. With all the symbolic art, the mysterious solid towers, and the carefully constructed ambiance, it definitely had a VIP spiritual event happening here. Please maintain a respectful silence vibe. Quiet now. Sacred stuff is in progress. And please, no flash photography of the ancestral spirits. It disturbs their ethereal glow. It's easy to imagine processions moving through those narrow passages, rituals being performed in the open spaces within the enclosures, and the conical tower serving as a focal point for ceremonies related to harvest, rainmaking, investiture of rulers, or ancestral veneration. The very act of building such monumental structures could also have been a religious undertaking, a way of honoring the gods or ancestors, or securing their favor for the community. So, was it a fortress, a palace, or a shrine? The most likely answer, and the one favored by most contemporary scholars, is that it was all of these and more. In many traditional African societies, and indeed in many ancient civilizations worldwide, there wasn't such a strict separation between the political, religious, economic, and military spheres of life as we often conceive of it today. The king or ruler was frequently also a chief religious figure, responsible for mediating with the spiritual world to ensure the prosperity and well-being of his people. The royal residence was often also the primary ceremonial center. Control of trade and resources was linked to political power, which in turn was often legitimized by religious beliefs. This leads us to a rather quirky or fringe tidbit concerning early attempts to explain not just who built it, but why it was so wealthy. One of the more enduring romantic notions, driven by a desire to connect southern Africa to biblical narratives, was that Great Zimbabwe was the site of King Solomon's legendary Ophir, the source of his immense gold wealth. This theory, popularized in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, imagined the site as a Semitic colony or a Phoenician trading post established to exploit the region's gold. King Solomon's gold mines. You say my word. How fascinating. Next, you'll be telling me they discovered his lost set of golf clubs propped up inside the conical tower, just waiting for his return. While it makes for a thrilling adventure story, archaeological evidence has long since debunked this idea, firmly establishing Great Zimbabwe's indigenous origins and its wealth as being generated and controlled by the local Shona state. Through their own mining and trading activities, the gold was theirs, not Solomon's. The ongoing scholarly discussion often focuses on the nuances of how these different functions were balanced and expressed in different parts of the site. The precise balance and interplay between the secular political, economic, and sacred religious, ceremonial functions of the various enclosures at Great Zimbabwe continue to be a subject of rich academic discussion and ongoing research. For example, Was the hill complex primarily religious, while the great enclosure was more political and residential? Or did both share these functions to varying degrees? How did these functions change over the centuries of Great Zimbabwe's occupation? The experts basically agree that the place was incredibly important and multifaceted. How all the different kinds of importance juggled for space, prominence, and resources is where they get out their academic magnifying glasses. Consult the ethnographic records, re-examine the excavation reports, and have a good, thorough, and often spirited chinwag. Ultimately, the grandeur of Great Zimbabwe's walls likely served to legitimize and enhance the power of its rulers, to create a fitting stage for royal life and sacred ceremony, to control access to resources and important knowledge, and yes, to provide a degree of security. It wasn't just one thing. It was the heart of a thriving African kingdom, a symbol of its achievements, and a testament to its complex understanding of how architecture could shape society, power, and belief. Its complexity of purpose is not a sign of confusion, but rather a hallmark of its sophisticated, integrated worldview. Indeed, Great Zimbabwe's complexity of purpose is a hallmark of its sophisticated, integrated worldview. A city that was simultaneously a seat of power, a hub of commerce, and a sacred center. But even the most vibrant and powerful centers can fade, their bustling courtyards falling silent, their grand walls eventually surrendering to the slow embrace of nature. And so, we come to a more poignant chapter in our story, the echoes of abandonment. Why did this magnificent city, the heart of a thriving kingdom, eventually empty out? Its fires growing cold, its pathways untrodden by the thousands who once called it home, and how did it later re-emerge into the wider world's consciousness? The decline of Great Zimbabwe wasn't a sudden, cataclysmic event, like a city wiped out by a volcanic eruption or a single, decisive battle. Instead, it was a gradual process, likely beginning in the mid-15th century, with the site being largely depopulated by the early 16th century. Great Zimbabwe began to decline in the mid-15th century and was largely abandoned by the early 16th century, likely due to a combination of factors including environmental degradation, shifts in trade routes, and political fragmentation. There was no dramatic lights-out moment, more like a slow dimming of its once brilliant flame. Even the grandest empires, the most impressive stone cities, eventually face their Houston, we have a problem moment. For Great Zimbabwe, it might have been a series of slowly accumulating challenges, a royal pronouncement along the lines of, "Great King, esteemed council, we seem to have a rather noticeable depletion of local firewood. The grazing lands are looking a bit sparse for the royal herds, and the gold trade, well, it's gone a bit quiet lately, hasn't it?" Several interconnected factors are believed to have contributed to this decline. One major pressure was likely environmental. Supporting a large, concentrated population of potentially up to 18,000 people, plus their livestock, for several centuries would have put an immense strain on the local ecosystem. Forests would have been cleared for firewood, essential for cooking, heating, iron smelting, and perhaps even for fire setting and quarrying. Grazing lands for the vast herds of cattle, a cornerstone of their wealth and society, would have become overgrazed and depleted. Soil fertility in the agricultural lands surrounding the city might have declined after generations of intensive cultivation. Add to this the possibility of climate change, periods of prolonged drought, which are known to have affected southern Africa at various times, and you have a recipe for serious resource stress. Why did they eventually leave? Maybe the ancient equivalent of Wi-Fi got really, really bad. Or, much more plausibly, it was this complex interplay of resource depletion and the pragmatic decision to seek new, more fertile grounds, perhaps leading to the thought, let's find a new capital with better grazing, more trees, and fewer overly ambitious, multi-generational stone construction projects on the immediate agenda. Another critical factor was likely shifting trade routes. Great Zimbabwe's prosperity was significantly built on its control of the gold trade from the interior to the Swahili coast. However, by the 15th century, new gold fields may have opened up elsewhere, or existing trade networks might have reconfigured, perhaps favoring routes further north or west. The arrival of the Portuguese on the East African coast in the late 15th and early 16th centuries also began to disrupt established indigenous trade patterns, though Great Zimbabwe's decline was already underway by then. When the economic lifeblood of a city begins to flow elsewhere, its power and ability to sustain a large population inevitably diminish. Political factors also played a significant role. The large Shona state, of which Great Zimbabwe was the capital, may have begun to fragment due to internal succession disputes, rivalries between different factions of the ruling elite, or the rise of ambitious regional leaders. As central authority weakened, new power centers emerged. Successor states, like the Mutapa state to the north and the Torwa state, and later the Rosvi Empire to the west, rose to prominence, inheriting some of the traditions and perhaps even some of the population of Great Zimbabwe. It wasn't necessarily that the Shona civilization itself collapsed, but rather that its political and demographic center of gravity shifted. It's important to understand that abandonment doesn't mean the site was completely forgotten or became a total wasteland overnight. Local populations, descendants of the city's builders, continued to live in the region. They knew of the stone city, often holding it in reverence as a sacred place, the home of their ancestors and powerful spirits. Oral traditions preserved memories of its past glories, even as the great stone enclosures themselves gradually fell silent and began to be reclaimed by vegetation. Centuries passed. The walls stood, weathered by sun and rain, their once bustling interiors now home only to birds, insects, and perhaps the occasional leopard seeking shelter. Then came its rediscovery by the outside world. While Portuguese traders and explorers in the 16th century had heard tales of, and even made vague references to, impressive stone structures in the interior. It wasn't until the latter half of the 19th century that European hunters, traders, and prospectors began to encounter Great Zimbabwe more directly. Adam Renders, a German-American hunter, is often credited as one of the first Europeans to see the ruins in 1867, and he was followed in 1871 by the German geologist and explorer Karl Mauch, whose accounts brought the site to wider international attention. Imagine stumbling upon this place in the remote African bush in the 1860s or 70s. Well, Bob. One can almost hear an astonished explorer remarking to his companion, "This certainly wasn't on the hand-drawn tourist map. Looks like someone, or some group of very determined someones, had a very serious Jenga phase a few centuries back." And on an epic scale, This rediscovery, however, was a double-edged sword. While it brought Great Zimbabwe to global notice, it also ushered in a period of profound misinterpretation and colonial appropriation. As we've discussed, many early European observers, blinded by racial prejudice, simply couldn't accept that indigenous Africans could have built such a sophisticated city. This led to the proliferation of those fanciful theories about Phoenicians, Sabaeans, or King Solomon. It also, tragically, led to some incredibly destructive early archaeological work. Individuals like Richard Hall in the early 20th century, convinced he was uncovering a non-African civilization, removed vast quantities of archaeological deposits, destroying crucial evidence about the site's later, and therefore, in his view, degenerate Bantu occupation. Early archaeology here was sometimes less rigorous scientific investigation and more enthusiastic treasure hunt with a spade, often guided by preconceived notions and a disturbing lack of respect for the actual history. Thankfully, later, more scientific archaeologists like David Randall McIver and Gertrude Caton Thompson firmly established the site's indigenous African origins in the early to mid-20th century. Though the struggle to reclaim its narrative fully has been a long one, even amidst the plundering and misinterpretation, an aura of mystery and power clung to the ruins. This brings us to a quirky or fringe tidbit regarding local beliefs. It was sometimes whispered, perhaps even by those who continued to live near the ancient city after its main abandonment, that a powerful curse or protective magic guarded Great Zimbabwe's hidden treasures, deterring those who would seek to plunder it for personal gain. While this didn't seem to stop some of the more determined early European antiquarians and treasure hunters from carting off soapstone birds and other artifacts. The idea of a protective curse adds another layer to the site's mystique. Perhaps it was a local way of trying to discourage desecration, a subtle warning. Don't touch my leftover ancestral pottery and ceremonial items. They're super cursed. You'll have terrible luck with your next hunt, or your sorghum beer will always be flat. Effective, I bet, against the more superstitious intruders walking through the silent enclosures today. It's impossible not to feel the weight of that abandonment. The wind sighs through the empty doorways and along the tops of the immense walls, carrying with it the echoes of a vibrant past. You try to imagine the sounds, the smells, the daily rhythms of life that once filled these spaces, and then contrast it with the profound quiet that now reigns. It's like envisioning a massive, centuries-long festival, full of music, commerce, ritual, and life. And then one day, almost imperceptibly at first, the crowds begin to thin, the music fades, the merchants pack up their wares, and slowly, inexorably, everyone drifts away, until only the magnificent stone stage remains, waiting for a new audience, a new interpreter. The reasons for this desertion are still meticulously examined. The precise weighting of factors, environmental pressures versus shifts in political power or trade dynamics in the eventual decline and abandonment of Great Zimbabwe, is still a complex puzzle that historians and archaeologists meticulously piece together from a mosaic of clues, climate data, archaeological finds, oral histories, and the study of successor states. There's rarely a single simple answer to why great cities fall, but what is clear is that the story of Great Zimbabwe didn't end with its abandonment. It simply entered a new phase, one of quiet endurance, potent symbolism for later generations, and eventual re-engagement with a wider, often uncomprehending world. But what is clear is that the story of Great Zimbabwe didn't end with its abandonment. It simply entered a new phase, one of quiet endurance, potent symbolism for later generations, and eventual re-engagement with a wider, often uncomprehending world. And it's in this endurance, this lasting legacy, that we find some of its most profound lessons. The stones may have fallen silent in terms of daily human hustle and bustle for a few centuries, but their voice, their significance, has resonated louder than ever in more recent times. Today, Great Zimbabwe is far more than just an impressive archaeological site. It has become a powerful symbol of national identity for the modern nation of Zimbabwe, which proudly bears its name. This isn't just a casual namesake. It's a profound reclamation of history and heritage after decades of colonial rule, during which the true origins of Great Zimbabwe were often obscured or denied. The independent nation chose this ancient city as its emblem, the iconic Zimbabwe bird, one of those enigmatic soapstone sculptures found within the ruins. Now graces the national flag, a constant reminder of a rich, indigenous African past and a sophisticated pre-colonial civilization. Talk about a monumental glow-up, from largely deserted ancient capital to face of the nation. Not a bad trajectory for a collection of exceptionally well-stacked rocks. It's the ultimate historical "I told you I was important" moment. And deservedly so. Its global importance is also officially recognized. Great Zimbabwe is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, a designation that acknowledges its immense historical and cultural importance as a testament to the Shona civilization and its remarkable achievements in architecture, trade, and social organization. This places it on a par with other globally significant sites, ensuring its protection and preservation for future generations, and highlighting its value not just to Zimbabwe, but to all of humanity. What are the lessons held within its architecture, within its story? Firstly, it stands as an undeniable testament to human ingenuity and adaptation. The builders of Great Zimbabwe didn't have access to advanced by our standards technology or imported materials for construction. They worked with what their environment provided, the local granite, and developed extraordinary skills to transform it into something monumental and enduring. Their dry stone techniques, their ability to quarry and shape stone, their understanding of basic engineering principles, all speak of a society that was deeply observant, innovative, and capable of solving complex problems. So, one key lesson: if you're planning to build an entire city out of stone, make sure your local geology is cooperative, and perhaps more importantly, human creativity can flourish with surprisingly limited resources if the vision and the skill are there. Secondly, Great Zimbabwe tells us volumes about social organization and shared vision. Constructing something on this scale, over centuries, required more than just skilled individuals. It demanded a society capable of mobilizing and coordinating vast amounts of labor, of planning for the long term, and of sharing a common purpose or belief in the importance of the undertaking. Whether driven by religious fervor, political ambition, or communal pride, the ability to bring people together for such a sustained, monumental effort is a powerful lesson in itself. Then, there's the artistry and symbolism woven into the very fabric of the stone, the decorative patterns, the enigmatic conical tower, the careful layout of enclosures, These elements remind us that architecture is rarely just about function. It's also a form of communication, a way of expressing identity, belief, and power. The builders of Great Zimbabwe weren't just creating shelter or defenses. They were creating meaning, embedding their worldview in the landscape. Of course, the story of its decline also offers lessons, perhaps particularly relevant in our modern world, about sustainability and resource management. The very success and growth of Great Zimbabwe may have sown the seeds of its eventual decline, as the pressure on local resources, timber, water, grazing land, soil fertility, became unsustainable. It's a timeless reminder that even the most powerful civilizations are ultimately dependent on the health of their environment. So, another lesson from the stones when you're building your magnificent capital city. Maybe also draw up a really good long-term firewood and pasture management plan. And perhaps consider a public transport system to reduce wear and tear on the royal footpaths. And yet, despite its eventual decline as a major population center, the sheer endurance of the structures is awe-inspiring. These walls have weathered centuries of sun, rain, and wind. They have seen empires rise and fall elsewhere, witnessed the arrival of new peoples, the transformation of landscapes. They stand as stoic observers of the long arc of history, probably looking down and thinking. Humans, so fleeting, so energetic, so endlessly interesting in their endeavors. Their longevity is a testament to the skill of their builders and the inherent stability of their design. Dry stone walls, when properly constructed, are surprisingly durable. Folks, modern builders, take notes. Visiting Great Zimbabwe today is a profound experience, knowing its history, the centuries of its flourishing, the mystery of its decline, the struggles over its interpretation, and its ultimate embrace as a national treasure adds layers of meaning to every stone. It's less Indiana Jones cautiously avoiding ancient booby traps, and more a quiet, respectful awe at human achievement and the deep echoes of the past. Though, still, probably best not to pocket any ancient-looking stones you might find, for good karma, and also because it's a protected World Heritage Site, and that's just not cool. The atmosphere within the enclosures, especially at quieter times of day like dawn or dusk, can be incredibly evocative. The wind whispers through the narrow passages. The light plays on the textured surfaces of the granite, and it's easy to feel a sense of connection to the people who lived, worked, and worshipped here so long ago. And this brings us to a rather lovely, quirky, or fringe tidbit of modern folklore associated with the site. There's a persistent, though entirely unproven, local legend that on certain quiet nights, if you listen with a particularly attentive ear, you can still hear the faint, ghostly sounds of ancient music, the distant rhythm of drums, or even hushed chanting carried on the breeze within the great enclosure, as if the site itself is remembering and replaying echoes of its vibrant past. Hearing ancient music in the ruins might just be the wind playing tricks on your ears, or perhaps a very well-hidden Bluetooth speaker strategically placed by a mischievous tour guide with a flair for the dramatic. Or maybe, just maybe, the stones really do remember, in their own silent, resonant way. The story of Great Zimbabwe is not a closed book. The full extent of Great Zimbabwe's regional influence and the precise nature of its relationships with contemporaneous smaller settlements, its exact role in the gold trade networks, and the detailed social dynamics within its walls are still areas where new archaeological discoveries and interpretations continue to refine our understanding. Archaeologists continue to work, analyze, and debate, ensuring that our knowledge of this incredible place is constantly evolving. Just when you think we've got a reasonably complete picture, someone unearths a previously unknown cache of trade beads, or uses a new scientific technique to analyze the source of the gold, or reinterprets the layout of a particular enclosure, and it's back to the academic drawing board, which is fantastic, of course, because history, especially ancient history, loves a good, illuminating plot twist, or at least a new subplot. Great Zimbabwe stands as a powerful counter-narrative to outdated colonial myths of an empty or undeveloped Africa. It is a testament to the innovation, artistry, and complex societal structures that existed in southern Africa long before European contact. Its enduring stone walls and enigmatic structures continue to inspire awe, provoke thought, and teach us valuable lessons about the past, and perhaps about ourselves and our shared human capacity to create, to organize, and to leave a lasting mark on the world. And as our journey through the surprisingly complex architecture of these ancient walls draws towards its close, as the imaginary sun begins to dip below the horizon of this historical landscape, the stones settle into their timeless watch. They have shared some of their secrets, hinted at others, and will undoubtedly keep many more locked within their silent granite hearts, waiting for future generations to come and listen. The air around you seems to grow still, the vastness of the African night beginning to unfold, just as it did for the builders of this incredible place so many centuries ago. The massive stone walls, now deep silhouettes against a sky dusted with the first stars, seem to breathe with a slow, ancient rhythm. You've walked their ramparts in your mind, traced their patterns, pondered their purpose, and felt the echoes of the lives lived within their embrace, the ingenuity of their mortarless construction, the sheer scale of the undertaking, the artistry woven into their very fabric, all speak of a people with a profound connection to their land, a powerful vision, and an extraordinary ability to bring that vision to life. From the first glimmer of an idea to the final, carefully placed stone, Great Zimbabwe is a story of human endeavor, of community, of belief, and of an enduring legacy that continues to captivate and inspire. As the last light fades and a profound quiet descends, allow the images of those majestic, curving walls, the enigmatic tower, and the intricate passageways to settle gently in your mind. Let the faint, imagined sounds of a thriving city give way to the soft whisper of the night breeze as it moves through the ancient, silent stones. There's a deep peace here, a sense of time stretching back into an almost unfathomable past, and a comforting reassurance in the enduring strength of what human hands and human spirit can achieve. The story of Great Zimbabwe, etched in granite, is a powerful reminder of the rich and complex tapestry of our shared human heritage. May its echoes inspire a sense of wonder, and may your own dreams tonight be filled with the quiet majesty of these enduring stones. Sweet dreams.